Chapter 227. Was this the real Jinxian or something else? This dream was a little too realistic. She stood up out of habit, swaying as she stood by the sofa. She raised her head to look at the man who was a head taller than her. Was it a dream? As she spoke, she reached out to pinch the man's face. Jinxian did not dodge. However, just as her hand was about to touch his face, he caught it with one hand and pulled it down. He held it in his hand and used his strength to support her, preventing her from falling back. It's a dream. The man's voice was low and cold. She could not hear his emotions. Jean Wan stood in front of him, widening her drunken eyes as she tried her best to look at him. After staring for a long time, she suddenly smiled. Forget it. Who cared if it was a dream or an illusion? In any case, it wasn't the real Jinxian. She could scold him however she wanted. It was just an illusion. He definitely wouldn't mind. Jinxian. Jean Wan's temper immediately flared up. She planned to show off her might to the illusion in front of her and vent out the anger she had accumulated over the past month. She suddenly pointed at his nose, raising her drunken little face and misty eyes to glare at him. You tortoise bastard. The man's handsome brows rose slightly. You know how to scold people? What do you mean I know how to scold people? In the past, when this old lady quarreled with others and scolded them, you didn't see it. Why do all the rich young ladies in Hai Cheng hate me so much? Isn't it because back then, they all came to provoke me and ended up being scolded until their eyes turned red? It's not like you don't know what kind of personality I had in the past. Jean Wan abruptly stood on her tiptoes, raising her hand to tug on his collar. She pursed her lips and began her long journey of venting her frustrations. For you, I nearly pulled out all the thorns on my body. For our marriage, I worked hard to do everything. I've never doubted you. The night before, I was frightened in the underground bar. My panic turned to despair. It was all because of that person I didn't know. The night after, I found out that it was all because of your ex-fiancé. Was I supposed to smile and say it's fine, that I didn't mind? Do you think I have no conscience? Let me tell you, if I, Jean Wan, did not have a conscience, would never stick to you like this in this lifetime. So what if it's a divorce? I can go far away. But I've staked everything I have on you, Jinxian. I've given you everything. My everything. My everything. You are indeed unconditionally good to me, but apart from that, you are an abyss that I can't even touch. I don't even know how far away I am from your heart. The wound on Jean Wan's forehead had long healed. Her forehead, which was covered by her bangs, was smooth and clean. It was impossible to tell what she had experienced in the underground bar a month ago. The man's hand brushed aside her slightly sweaty bangs. She suddenly turned her head and bit down on his finger. As she bit down, she thought that it was a dream anyway. It didn't hurt, and neither did he. She had vented all her anger. She had scolded him, and tomorrow, she would be a good man again. He didn't struggle free. Instead, he reached out an arm to steady her body and let her bite him. The taste of blood overflowed from her mouth. Jean Wan finally stopped. She suddenly muttered softly, as though she was muttering to herself, I should have changed my life from the very beginning. I must have lost my mind. Otherwise, why would I willingly submit to the siege you drew and be blocked by a man like you who is addicted to poppies? I'm wrong because I can't control my heart calmly. I'm wrong because I care too much about you, right? The back of Jean Wan's head was held. The man's lips pressed down, blocking her lips. Jean Wan was stunned. Just as she was about to step back, the hand on the back of her head firmly restrained her. The force that restrained her was not gentle. Although it could not be said to be rough, it was much stronger than usual. She was really too drunk. After struggling for a while, she felt tired. The pain and numbness on her lips did not allow her to react. How could there be such a clear sensation in a dream? After that, she fell asleep in a daze. She didn't even know how she fell asleep. Jean Wan did not sleep well. In less than half an hour, she had a bunch of messy nightmares. She frowned and suddenly opened her eyes in shock. The glaring light in the room made her close her eyes again. However, just a glance was enough for her to clearly see the man's handsome face. She realized that she seemed to be lying on the sofa. Mo Jingshan was still there in her dream. "You're awake? Do you have a headache?" The man's voice fell by her ear. Hearing this voice, which was frighteningly real, Jean Wan's eyelashes trembled. She opened her misty eyes again and looked at the man's face in a trance. She reached out to touch his face to see if the illusion would suddenly disappear. When she reached out, the man's palm suddenly held her waist. Jean Wan was brought to sit on his lap. She pressed her head against his shoulder. She tried to sit up, but her head still drooped little by little on his shoulder. "Mo Jingshan," she said softly. "In the future, let's not quarrel, all right?" Jean Wan buried her face in his neck. Her voice was low and soft. The man's hand paused on the top of her head. After a moment, he looked at her mildly. "Are you sober or still drunk? Can you recognize if I'm an illusion or if I'm your husband?" Jean Wan buried her face deeper into his neck. "I don't know." Mo Jingshan narrowed his eyes and looked at her unkindly. He raised his hand to encircle the little woman who had vented her anger with the help of the alcohol. He said indifferently, "Then let's talk when you're sober." "I don't talk to drunkards." Jean Wan, she abruptly tried to leave his lap, but the man held her down and did not let her move. "You're so drunk, yet you still have the strength to struggle. It seems like the 1 month I gave you wasn't enough time to calm down. Earlier, you said you wouldn't quarrel, but now you're keeping a distance with me with a dark face? Let go of me. I want to go down." "Reason?" "You." Jean Wan raised her half-drunk and half-sober eyes. Her slightly disheveled hair stuck to her cheeks. Her earlier resentful expression was now tinged with awkwardness. Her lips moved twice before she spat out a few stiff words. "You stared at me." As she spoke, she tried to shift her butt on his lap. Mo Jingshan lowered his head to look at the woman's face in his arms. His eyes were as deep as the ocean in the silent night. His soft kisses landed on her soft hair. "We haven't seen each other for more than a month. If you move around again, it won't be as simple as hurting you. Dash." Chapter 228. Now that he had said this, if she continued to move on his lap, she would be an idiot. Seeing that she had become obedient, Mo Jingshan rubbed her hair as though he was in a good mood. "You've already vented your anger. You've also said that you won't fight anymore. Now, does that hedgehog heart of yours that has its thorns removed feel better?" Jean Wan did not speak. Her entire body's senses were focused on the area below her. She was clearly not moving, but why was it still becoming more and more uncomfortable? "Little heartless, you still know that I'm angry at you for being heartless. Yet, you're using your drunkenness to shout so much at me. Do you think this is a competition of loudness? Does louder mean you're right?" The man's slender fingers weaved through her hair and finally landed on her shoulders. His hand gripped the back of her neck, forcing her to raise her head to look at his face. Although his voice was slightly lowered, as though he was coaxing her, his indifferent gaze made her realize that if she was not drunk and not clear-headed enough, he would most likely have pressed her down on the bed to reason with her. However, right now, Jean Wan could not tell what reason he wanted to reason with her. Her head was dizzy. Aside from the man's face being particularly clear, she really could not differentiate between north, south, east, and west. However, seeing that she was currently so drunk, he did not plan on bickering with her anymore. If he got drunk, he would be able to avoid facing the storm of all kinds of persuasive words and instigation. It seemed like drinking wasn't a bad thing. When Jean Wan woke up, the sky outside the window was already bright. Hangovers were truly too torturous. Yet, there were so many people who liked to stay drunk all night. Every time she woke up drunk, her head would hurt like hell. She sat up and lifted the blankets to discover that she was sleeping on the bed in the condo's bedroom. Of the 2 pillows on the bed, only her side had traces of being slept on, and only her side of the blankets had been lifted. Last night, Jean Wan's memories were slightly blurry. She could only vaguely remember some vague impressions. She raised her hand to rub her head and then grabbed her hair. She tried hard to recall but could not figure out if it was a hallucination or reality. She got off the bed and opened the closet to change. She then walked out of the bedroom to look at the empty living room. Looking at the sky outside the window, it should be at least 7 o'clock. If it was just a hallucination, how on earth did she return to the apartment last night? Fong Ling knew that she didn't want to come back to live, so she couldn't take the initiative to send her here. However, if it wasn't an illusion, she would still be the only one in the apartment. The silence made her wonder if she had accidentally entered an isolated world. There was no sound at all. Jean Wan was slightly hungry. She went to the kitchen to open the refrigerator and saw that it was still filled with the food that the auntie had sent over 2 days ago. She was not interested in the fruits and food inside. She took out a bottle of yogurt, closed the refrigerator door, opened the lid, and walked out expressionlessly. When he walked back to the sofa in the living room, he suddenly stopped and saw a glass cup on the coffee table. He walked over and picked up the cup. There was still half a cup of water in it. He brought it to his nose and sniffed it. It was the smell of hangover tea. She turned to look at the shirt on the sofa. It was the white shirt that the man had changed out of before he left. It looked very clean, but when she picked it up and took a careful sniff, she could still smell the scent of alcohol on it, as well as the refreshing morning scent that only Mo Jingshan had. It was Mo Jingshan's shirt. It was also the half cup of hangover tea that Mo Jingshan had fed her before she went to bed. When she turned back, she saw that there was an extra pair of indoor slippers by the door. They were gray. The auntie had previously tidied them up, but Mo Jingshan had skillfully taken them out and put them on. Another pair of pink indoor slippers was currently being worn by her feet. Some of her drunken memories resurfaced bit by bit. Jean Wan abruptly turned around and walked around the apartment. Although the apartment was as quiet and empty as ever, and it was indeed too big for her to live alone, she saw that there was an extra set of men's razors and a mint-flavored bottle of aftershave in the bathroom. After walking around, Jean Wan returned and sat on the sofa. She leaned back and rested her head on the back of the sofa, lost in thought. So what happened last night was real. What did she say to Mo Jingshan last night? She even seemed to have tugged on his collar and angrily scolded him. What exactly did she scold? He had left traces of himself in this apartment. Did this mean that he was really not going to hold it against her anymore? But he was not around this early in the morning. It couldn't be that she had scolded him too much last night and angered him away, right? Jean Wan pressed her forehead, her eyes staring at the half cup of hangover tea on the coffee table. After thinking for a moment, she suddenly picked up her phone to take a look. There was no call or message. By the time Jean Wan left the apartment, it was already past 8 o'clock. Professor Lin's daily class started at 8 o'clock. It was already late, and she did not have the time to buy breakfast. She headed straight for Tea University. When she rushed to the classroom, Professor Lin was in the middle of teaching. He only glanced at her and did not ask anything, indicating for her to quickly sit down. Usually, Professor Lin was very strict with these hedonistic young masters. No one was allowed to be late. If they were late more than 3 times, they could forget about staying here. However, today, he did not say anything and actually allowed Jean Wan to sit down. You were so drunk last night. I thought you would sleep the entire day, Bai Wei said softly by the side when Jean Wan sat down. If she did not mention this, Jean Wan would have forgotten that she went out to drink with Bai Wei last night. Afterward, she was so drunk that she almost fainted. It seemed like it was Fong Ling who came to support her. What happened after that? It couldn't be that she was caught by Mo Jingshan in the act while she was still in that bar, could it? I drank the hangover tea last night and sobered up a little. My biological clock is very punctual. I wake up when it's time. Jean Wan did not explain further and calmly replied. Didn't Feng Ling leave with you last night? The two of you didn't return to the dormitory yesterday. Now that you're here, where's Feng Ling? Jean Wan glanced at the seat where Feng Ling usually sat. As expected, it was empty. Could it be that Feng Ling thought that she would be with Mo Jingshan for the past 2 days and did not continue following her? I don't know. I'll give her a call in a while to ask. Jean Wan shifted her gaze away from the seat. Her heart was slightly hesitant. However, in her impression, Feng Ling always followed through with her actions. She was also very reliable. Even if she thought that she would be at Mo Jingshan's place and did not come to class, she would at least give Jean Wan a call or send her a message. Chapter 229. In the condo. Mo Jingshan looked at the shirt Jean Wan had folded for him, the glass cup she had washed, and the shaver she had placed in the bathroom cabinet. The corners of his lips turned up slightly. Last night, Jean Wan was still drunk, acting as though she had been holding it in for a month. Today, she obediently tidied up the traces he had left behind. This little woman was really becoming more and more duplicitous. Mo Jingshan tugged open the top few buttons of his shirt, glanced at the sky outside the window, and chuckled softly. At this moment, his phone received a message. He glanced at it. Nanhang, in T-City? Mo Jingshan replied with one word, N. Nanhang, in that condo or somewhere else? Mo Jingshan casually replied, condo. In less than half an hour, Nanhang drove over, directly knocking on the door and entering. Mo Jingshan looked at his travel-worn appearance. It was clear that he had driven across the province overnight. His entire person exuded a cold and dispirited aura. The moment he entered, he went inside to find water to drink. Why did you come in such a hurry? What's the matter? Mo Jingshan calmly glanced at her. After drinking a glass of water, Nanhang put down the glass in his hand, speaking. Back when Feng Ling completed a mission for 11 Base in America, she once intercepted several smuggled military vehicles belonging to the New York Mafia. Those people from the Mafia have been tracking her whereabouts for the past 2 years. My men found out that they have been making some movements in the country recently, and in the past 2 days, they have been moving toward T-City. I'm afraid Feng Ling's whereabouts have already been tracked. Mo Jingshan coldly raised his eyelids, watching him. It's all old grudges formed with 11 Base. It's related to the underground arms trade in New York and Los Angeles. Their target is Feng Ling, and it won't affect your woman. Nanhang rushed over overnight. He did not sleep the entire night. His expression was dark as he coughed. But for the next few days, it's best if Feng Ling doesn't follow Jean Wan. If they find out that Jean Wan is close to her, it won't be a good thing. Mo Jingshan's cold brows moved slightly. The New York Mafia's vengeance has always targeted a specific person. With their abilities, they won't be able to cause trouble in the country. They won't dare to implicate more people in the country's territory. Nanhang nodded. Feng Ling's matter is only related to the base mission she completed. It has nothing to do with what you did in the United States a few years ago. Keep an eye on Jean Wan. I don't need your help here. I know what I'm doing. Be careful. Mo Jingshan said calmly, when the time is right, let's send those people who frequently set up obstacles in the United States to the next world. These years, they have also committed many evil deeds. When the time is right, we should personally send them on their way. After a moment of silence, Nanhang said, Did you return to America a few days ago? Mo Jingshan was expressionless. He only listened and did not respond. The news I got from the front line is that the old man of the Su family is very angry with you. What about it? Did the thing that happened to Jean Wan a month ago really touch your bottom line? Nanhang's cold and seductive eyes contained a trace of mockery. I don't believe it if you say that Elder Sue didn't have any agreement with your father back then. In the end, he thought that he had played a big game, but he didn't know that the manipulator behind the scenes had long been replaced by you. Back then, not only did you break off the engagement with his precious granddaughter, but you also restricted all aspects of the Sue family. In the past 2 years, he was also very dumbfounded. Even if the Sue family's influence is widespread in the United States, they clearly do not intend to openly clash with you. I'm curious, what exactly did you do in America last month? That night, Elder Sue was sent to the emergency room in a fit of anger. Thankfully, his life is very tough, and he returned after staying in the hospital for 4 days. But recently, the Sue family seems to be closing the country to guard against death. Are you really going to kill his precious granddaughter to avenge Jean Wan? Mo Jingshan's smile was calm, as though the manipulator behind the scenes like an executioner that Nan Heng spoke of was not him. His tone was calm. I didn't do anything. I only let him see the pros and cons of the entire matter. If he plans to play a joke with the fate of the entire Sue family, I naturally don't mind playing a joke with him. Nan Heng raised his brows. He turned to look at the slightly empty apartment. It was clear that no one came here often. He chuckled. It's already been so long. Don't tell me that Jean Wan is still angry? Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold. You can scram now. Nan Heng glanced at the time. Right now was indeed not a good time to tease his brother. He had driven here through the night. Time was too tight. Mo Jingshan was an expert who did not shed a single drop of blood. From the beginning until now, aside from the fiancé who had only existed for a year due to Mo Xiao's interference, he had not missed a single step. For him, perhaps only Jean Wan, who had entered his life from the beginning and gradually rampaged in his life, was the only accident. Downstairs, several security guards on duty stood ramrod straight in front of the apartment. Nan Heng walked over, took out his phone, and showed them a photo of a single person. This short-haired, tall, and skinny woman often comes and goes here. After last night, have you seen her? When the security guards saw the photo, they immediately recognized her as the person who often accompanied Miss G in and out of this apartment. 2 days ago, I saw her come back with Miss G, but not yesterday. I haven't seen her the entire day. Hearing these words, Nan Heng's gaze turned cold. He took long strides, his expression cold as he walked out. The next day, Jean Wan stayed at T University as usual. Yesterday, she did not receive any news from Feng Ling, nor did she pick up her calls. If it were not for the fact that Professor Lin was about to conduct a random test on this batch of students, Jean Wan would have returned to the apartment last night to take a look. Previously, when Feng Ling did not live with her, Feng Ling had a very suitable residence near the apartment. It was located in a residential area that was not too crowded. After another day of classes, Jean Wan called Feng Ling, but she still did not pick up. She decided to leave T University and head to the residential area where Feng Ling had stayed for a few days to take a look. For the past month or so, she had suddenly lost contact with the person who was always by her side. On one hand, Jean Wan was not used to it, and on the other hand, she was worried that something had happened to Feng Ling. That residential area was not far from her apartment. It was only a bus stop away. Jean Wan walked there and did not take a taxi. However, from this intersection to the residential area, she had to go around a row of buildings. In the middle, there was a small alley between the buildings. Feng Ling had once brought Jean Wan through that alley. Chapter 230. Inside, a man could be heard cursing in fluent American English. Although Jean Wan didn't hear them clearly, she heard a word or two. With her English level, she could certainly understand them. She immediately leaned against the entrance of the alley and carefully looked in. She immediately saw Feng Ling standing against the wall. In front of her were 2 foreign men, tall and strong. The 2 men seemed to have surrounded her. One of them was holding a knife about the size of a watermelon, and the other was holding a long black electric baton. The two of them completely blocked Feng Ling. Seeing this, Jin Wan immediately withdrew her head, leaned against the entrance of the alley, and held her breath so as not to alarm the two men inside. When she saw Feng Ling being blocked by the two men, although she seemed to be standing steadily against the wall, her clothes were untidy, her short hair was slightly messy, and there were some bloodstains on her face. She didn't know where she was cut or what happened. In short, she must have been injured. Feng Ling didn't seem to have any weapons in her hands. No matter how good she was at fighting, she couldn't gain the upper hand. No matter how she was blocked by the two foreign men, Feng Ling probably hadn't contacted her since yesterday. Something big must have happened. The two men continued to curse inside. After a few words, suddenly there was the sound of fighting. Jin Wan listened for a while. Whether it was a hand-to-hand fight or a weapon, Jin Wan's heart was in her throat when she heard the sound inside. She suddenly looked up at a car parked across the alley. She didn't know if it was the accomplice of the two foreign men. The background of Feng Ling and the American 11 base was quite complicated. If Jin Wan called the police now, it might cause trouble for Feng Ling. She held her cell phone, paused on the call, and suddenly looked at a baseball equipment store on the first floor of the building. Her eyes lit up and she walked over. Feng Ling was confronting the two men. The battle had not stopped. Since yesterday, she had been avoiding the two men from the American Mafia, but in the end, she was still trapped here. Both of her arms were injured in the fight just now. Although it was not serious, there was still blood dripping down her arms. When one of the men scolded her again, her eyes sharpened, and with a roundhouse kick, she kicked the man with the knife to the ground. Before he stood up, he was about to fight the other man with the stun baton, but the stun baton in his hand was a very strong weapon. If she was electrocuted, half of her body would be numb for 2 days. In the confrontation, the man who had just been kicked down raised a knife and slashed at her head. Feng Ling nimbly raised her hand and grabbed his wrist. With a sharp twist, she heard the sound of his wrist dislocating. The foreign man, who was much taller than her, immediately cried out in pain. Feng Ling expressionlessly raised her foot and kicked him. However, at this moment, the other man directly stabbed her waist with the electric baton, and half of Feng Ling's body was instantly numb. Although she suddenly turned around to avoid it and was about to fight back, her movements were still a little slower because of the electric shock. The man took the opportunity to kick her in the stomach. Feng Ling bent over to avoid it, but the man suddenly pulled up the slightly longer short hair on her head. F***ck. All kinds of curses rang in her ears, and Feng Ling's scalp ached from the pulling. No matter how much strength she had used up a lot of her strength. She was trying to find a way to retreat from this man's hand when she suddenly noticed a figure appearing at the entrance of the alley from the corner of her eye. Feng Ling suddenly smiled at the two foreign men. The corner of her mouth was stained with blood. In the dim alley, her smile was a little cold and ruthless. When Feng Ling successfully attracted all the attention and suspicion of the two men, suddenly, with 2 bangs, the two men were hit on the back of their heads. Before they had time to turn their heads to look, they were hit by the baseball bat and fell to the ground. Dizzy and unable to stand firm, Feng Ling took the opportunity to stand up, subdued the two of them, and pressed them to the ground. Thank you. When pressing the two men down, Feng Ling ignored the blood on her body and turned her head to look at Jin Wan, who was holding a baseball bat in her hand. Jin Wan held the baseball bat tightly and quickly stepped forward, looking at the blood on Feng Ling's face and body with concern. She saw that Feng Ling had only been hit on the cheek. The other party had hit her so hard that her cheek was swollen and the corner of her mouth was stained with blood. She reached out to take Feng Ling's arm. How are you? Are your injuries serious? I'm fine. It's just a minor injury. Feng Ling didn't push Jin Wan's hand away but used her other hand to hit the back of the two men's necks. After being hit hard by the baseball bat and hit on the most vulnerable part of the neck, the two foreign men fainted and lay on the ground motionless. With Jin Wan's support, Feng Ling stood up. Seeing that Feng Ling didn't seem to be seriously injured, Jean Wan's tense heart finally relaxed a little. What's wrong with these two people? Do you have enemies in the United States? Enemies? Feng Ling glanced at the two men on the ground. Sort of. When I was still in 11 base, I did a lot of missions and made a lot of enemies. You're seriously injured. Let's get out of here first. Jean Wan pulled her hand hard again, wanting to take the injured Feng Ling away from this place. However, as soon as she exerted force, although Feng Ling didn't make a sound, she obviously frowned in pain. Jean Wan abruptly let go of her hand, saw the blood on her palm, and then looked at Feng Ling's black shirt, which couldn't see the color of the blood. Is the injury on your arm very serious? Jean Wan threw the baseball bat in her hand out and held her with both hands. Let's go to the hospital to stop the bleeding first. Before Feng Ling could say that she was fine, she had been forcibly taken out of the alley by Jean Wan. However, just as the two of them ran out of the alley, in the car parked in front of them, an accomplice who was also tall and strong suddenly opened the door and got out of the car. He held the same black electric baton in his hand and rushed toward them with a fierce look, cursing violently. Watch out. At the moment when the man swung the electric baton, Jean Wan and Feng Ling shouted almost at the same time. Jean Wan was about to pull the injured Feng Ling back, but Feng Ling instinctively pulled Jean Wan behind her, but the pain in her arm couldn't be ignored. The pain from the electric shock was still there. She wanted to push the man back, but her movements were still slower than usual for 2 or 3 seconds. In these 2 or 3 seconds, the man seized the opportunity and was about to reach out his other hand to restrain her. Chapter 231. They definitely couldn't go into the alley. Jean Wan pulled her to run to the other side, but the other party didn't intend to waste any time. Instead of chasing after them, he suddenly returned to the car and drove after them. Whether it was to chase after them or to bump into them, they didn't know. Mrs. Mo, you go first. Feng Ling suddenly paused. She did not plan to implicate Jean Wan. Why would I leave? I'm not a brother from your training base, so I don't know what sacrifice is, or what morality is. But in my eyes, you're already a good friend. How can I leave? As Jean Wan ran, she tugged hard at Feng Ling, preventing her from waving her hand away. Let's run first. There's an alley ahead. His car can't drive into it. We'll think of a way after we get in. Seeing Jean Wan's insistence, Feng Ling ran a few steps and felt that her numb body really needed at least a day or two to recover from the electric shock. She couldn't run as fast as usual. Just as the two of them were about to run to the other alley Jean Wan mentioned, suddenly, a black jeep galloped from the road in front of them at a fast speed, and the moment it came to a stop in front of them with a screech. Feng Ling and Jean Wan looked up only to see that the back door of the jeep in front of them was open from the inside out. Nan Heng, who was in the driver's seat, didn't explain at all. He just glanced at the blood on Feng Ling's face and said coldly, "Get in the car." Feng Ling's expression froze, and Jean Wan quickly helped her into the car. When Feng Ling sat in the car and saw that Jean Wan hadn't come up, she rushed to pull her. "Mrs. Mo, come." Jean Wan also got in the car, and the door closed with a bang. This sound isolated the sound of the engine of the car outside, and the tense atmosphere in the air finally relaxed a little. Before she could ask what was going on, Jean Wan sat by Feng Ling's side and tugged at her sleeve. "You're bleeding a lot. Do you want to go to the hospital to stop the bleeding or go somewhere else?" "She can't go to the hospital." Without waiting for Feng Ling to speak, Nan Heng, who was driving, said coldly, "Take her to my place. I have hemostatic medicine and gauze." Jean Wan, help her bandage. "Do you have a place to stay in T-City?" Jean Wan turned to look at Nan Heng. "Is it far?" "My apartment is close to here. Just ask her to go to my place." "Forget about you. You can't go with me now, lest you get into trouble." Nan Heng coldly spat out these words and glanced at Jean Wan through the rearview mirror. "Why were you there just now? If something like this happens again, remember to run first, okay?" Otherwise, if something happens to you, I'm afraid your man will chase me to the Pacific Ocean. I won't be able to live in peace for the rest of my life. Jean Wan didn't explain to him but continued to look at Feng Ling with concern. Seeing that Feng Ling's expression didn't change, she didn't seem to be surprised by the fact that they were chased earlier. She just didn't say anything. Jean Wan gently stroked her body. Are you hurt anywhere else? Don't just stay silent. Tell me where it hurts. If it's too serious, just going home to bandage it won't do. You still have to go to the hospital for an injection. Feng Ling shook her head at Jean Wan, indicating that she was fine and there was no need to worry. Jean Wan suddenly noticed that there were several cars driving in the opposite direction of them. The cars immediately surrounded the car driven by the foreign man. Right now, she had no time to pay attention to the situation outside the car. Jean Wan took out a wet towel from her bag to wipe the blood off Feng Ling's face. Seeing that Feng Ling's face was very pale, she immediately frowned. Someone actually dares to commit murder in broad daylight in our country. Is there any harm in this? Can we call the police? The domestic police can't handle this matter, Feng Ling said simply and raised her eyes to look at the man driving in front. Nan Heng's driving skills were not inferior to Mo Jingshan's. It was clear that he was used to driving this type of jeep. Under his control, the large body of the jeep drove out of the area at a fast speed and successfully took the two of them away before the police arrived. Nan Heng really did have a place to stay in T-City. It was a room on the top floor of a hotel that he had reserved for himself. No one was allowed to enter the entire floor. After entering the room, Jean Wan helped Feng Ling to sit on the sofa and urged Nan Heng to get the first aid kit. She then pressed Feng Ling's shoulder, saying, Feng Ling, I'll help you take off your clothes. Otherwise, when the blood coagulates, it will be very painful to take them off. Seeing that Jean Wan seemed to be really worried about her, Feng Ling's originally calm and flat expression wavered slightly. Since she was a child, Feng Ling had never experienced pure friendship with someone of the same gender. In the past, she had always lived like a man in the base. No matter what kind of injuries she suffered, she would hide in a place where no one could see and bandage her own wounds. You can't lift your hand now, can you? I'll help you take it off. Don't move. Jean Wan spoke and went to help her take off her clothes. Feng Ling did not refuse. When her top was taken off, thankfully, there was still a conservative black sportswear underneath. Jean Wan's attention was completely attracted by the knife wounds on Feng Ling's shoulder and arm. With a pained expression, she turned to the bathroom to wash a towel and help her wipe the blood around the wounds. Nan Heng came out with the first aid kit and saw such a scene. His gaze paused on Feng Ling, who was only wearing sports underwear. Before he could speak, Jean Wan had already rushed over and snatched the first aid kit from his hand. She then turned back to disinfect and stop the bleeding for Feng Ling. The room was very quiet. With Jean Wan bandaging Feng Ling's wounds, it was not convenient for Nan Heng to stand by the side and watch. He coughed and went out. Half an hour later, the wounds on Feng Ling's body were almost all treated. Jean Wan had just picked up the gauze to bandage her wounds. She then went into the room, opened the cabinet, and took out a loose black t-shirt that should have been worn by Nan Heng. She helped Feng Ling put it on. Not long after, Nan Heng entered the room. Seeing that Jean Wan had already crouched down to treat the wounds on Feng Ling's legs, he raised his brows and chuckled softly. You're quite thoughtful in treating the wounds. As expected, Miss G is much more useful than before. Jean Wan silently rolled her eyes at the disinfectant in her hand. She thought that Nan Heng was resentful towards her because he wanted to personally bandage Feng Ling's wounds but was unable to do so. She could not be bothered with him. At this moment, the doorbell suddenly rang. Jean Wan was startled and immediately raised her head to look in the direction of the door. She asked in surprise, "Who is it? Is there anyone else here who knows? Could it be those people who chased after Feng Ling earlier?" Nan Heng glanced at her. "Don't think too much. I just went out to talk to Mo Jingshan on the phone. He happens to be nearby. Who do you think will come now? Hearing this, Jean Wan abruptly turned to stare at the door behind Nanhang. Chapter 232. Since Mo Jingshan was outside, wasn't it the same no matter who opened the door? It was impossible to shut him out. The doorbell rang again. It was a pleasant chime, not very loud, not harsh. But in Jean Wan's ears, this voice was like a tsunami suddenly sweeping across a calm sea, making it impossible for her to ignore it. Nanhang was clearly teasing her. He did not open the door but stood there, looking at Jean Wan with a faint smile. Jean Wan's hand was still holding onto the bottle of medicine. She placed it on the wound on Feng Ling's calf and did not immediately get up. Feng Ling glanced at them and suddenly put down her legs. She said, "Why don't I drive it?" Nanhang immediately glanced at Feng Ling coldly. "Don't be nosy." Feng Ling's expression faltered. It had been a long time since she heard Nanhang speak in such a cold and stern tone. She paused and chose to sit on the sofa without moving. At the same time, she turned to look at Jean Wan. "Mr. Mo must have come to see you. Go open the door. My leg injury is not serious. I can do it myself." The doorbell did not ring again, but she felt that Mo Jingshan would not leave so soon. She put down the disinfectant in her hand, wiped her hands, and got up to go to the door. The moment she opened the door, Jean Wan's hand gripped the doorknob tightly. The man standing outside the door was tall and slender. He was still wearing that low-key, clean white shirt, which made his originally calm and reserved temperament appear even gentler and more meaningful. Jean Wan raised her eyes and looked at the man outside the door. Mo Jingshan's eyes fell on her face the moment the door opened. They hadn't seen each other for a whole month, and she hadn't been very clear-headed before. This could be considered a true reunion. After opening the door, Jean Wan only met his gaze. Before she could see the emotions in the man's eyes, she let go of the door handle, turned to walk in, and said, "I'll deal with the wound on Feng Ling's leg first." She didn't know if these words were meant for Mo Jingshan, Nanhang, or Feng Ling. In any case, Jean Wan didn't look at the man outside the door and went to Feng Ling's side. Feng Ling, who had suddenly become Jean Wan's biggest excuse, was thinking, indeed, she was like a little woman who had just learned how to fall in love. Thinking of Jean Wan's usual calm and composed demeanor, and comparing it with her current state, he somehow found it a little cute. Nanhang immediately smiled at Mo Jingshan, who had been thrown out the door, with a sympathetic gaze. Mo Jingshan, on the other hand, calmly entered, ignoring Nanhang's mocking expression. Seeing the blood-stained towel by the sofa and the wound on Feng Ling's leg, he could guess what kind of danger they had just experienced. "What's going on? You were intercepted so quickly?" Mo Jingshan looked at Feng Ling. "Why is Jean Wan with you? Why would Jean Wan be with her?" Of course, he was only referring to today. Feng Ling didn't have time to ask why Jean Wan had gone there. She lowered her eyes to look at Jean Wan, who was squatting by the sofa to disinfect her wound. "I haven't heard from you since yesterday. This has never happened before, so I suspected that something might have happened to you. I planned to go to the neighborhood you lived in for 2 days to take a look, but I ran into this scene." Jean Wan treated the wound on her leg seriously and did not raise her head as she spoke. She didn't expect that Jean Wan would actually worry about her. Clearly, she was Jean Wan's bodyguard. Feng Ling felt slightly ashamed. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Mo. I'll try to avoid this kind of thing in the future. If I accidentally hurt you, it would be my negligence. Today's matter, I'm really, being followed and surrounded by enemies isn't something you can control. Why are you apologizing to me?" Jean Wan still lowered her head, as though using this opportunity to talk to Feng Ling, she could successfully ignore the gaze of the man who was watching her from behind. Feng Ling suddenly raised her head. "Speaking of which, if Mrs. Mo hadn't helped me today, I wouldn't have been able to escape so smoothly." Nanhang raised his brows and glanced at them. "Is that so? Then, as a bodyguard, aren't you going to lose your job soon?" Do you want to return to America with me, to the base? Feng Ling, no. Nanhang, Jin Wan raised her eyes to look at Feng Ling. Seeing that she rejected her so straightforwardly, she immediately smiled. That's right, I'm not going back. Feng Ling is fine by my side. Why would I return to the base in America? What's so good about being with a bunch of men and suffering? Besides, even if I don't completely need a bodyguard by my side, I still need a good sister. Don't you think so? Feng Ling? These few days, Feng Ling had been touched by Jin Wan's words time and time again. She looked at Jin Wan and slightly raised the corners of her lips. Nanhang suddenly narrowed his eyes. He felt that after spending so much time with Jin Wan, Feng Ling had actually gained a hint of femininity and gentleness that he had never seen before. Does it hurt? Jin Wan saw that there was a red and swollen area around Feng Ling's ankle. She wasn't sure if she had bumped into it somewhere, so she used her hand to touch it. No, Feng Ling answered with a smile. Seeing the two of them acting out their deep sisterly affection, the two men who were completely ignored exchanged a silent glance. After helping Feng Ling with her wounds, Jin Wan stood up. She tidied up the medicine box and asked, Nanhang, do you have water here? Earlier, when she pulled Feng Ling along to run, Jin Wan didn't know if it was because of her heart or because she was really thirsty. Either way, her mouth was dry. Drinkable water? In the fridge, there's mineral water prepared by the hotel every day. Go look for it yourself. Although this was a hotel room, it was a family-style suite. There was a kitchen, a study, and a kitchen. The fridge would also have drinks delivered by the staff on time. Jin Wan put down the things in her hands and turned to enter the kitchen. She opened the fridge door and took out a bottle of water. She was about to twist it open when she realized that the cap was too tight. This was a bottle of mineral water that had not been opened. It was likely that the cap was not handled well when it left the factory. It was much tighter than other mineral water. She used a bit of force but was still unable to twist it open. She was about to place this bottle back into the fridge and change to another one. She had just opened the fridge door when the bottle in her hand was suddenly taken away. She only saw an arm reach out from behind her, and the water was already in that person's hand. Without needing to turn back, she only needed to see the arm in the white shirt to know that the man standing behind her was Mo Jingshan. Jin Wan was silent for a moment in front of the fridge door. She turned to look at the man who had easily opened the bottle cap for her. The already opened bottle of mineral water was handed to her. Mo Jingshan's voice was the same as always. Drink it. Jin Wan's hand paused for a moment before she raised it. When she received the water, her mind was still in a daze. For some reason, she said, "Thank you." Chapter 233. Thank you. Mo Jingshan's voice was low and indifferent. He glanced at her. Who are you talking to? To you, of course. Jin Wan held the water bottle without speaking. She then took a sip and calmly answered honestly. He did not speak further. Just as Jin Wan was about to walk past him to leave the kitchen with the bottle, he abruptly held her in his arms. He pushed the woman who was holding the bottle carefully forward, forcing her against the wall opposite the refrigerator. Seeing that the man was angered by her words, Jin Wan finally believed that he was not as indifferent as he appeared. He could control her emotions and her emotions. It turned out that this man was not always so calm. It turned out that he was also a mortal. He also had his emotions. She raised her eyes to look at him. What are you doing? Nanhang and Feng Ling are both outside. Even if you gave them 100 guts, they wouldn't dare to come in. Mo Jingshan's voice was as low and cold as ever. Repeat what you just said. Who are you saying thank you to? Jin Wan, who am I to you? Jin Wan's expression remained the same. Her voice was also calm. You used to be my husband. Then, we suddenly didn't contact each other for an entire month. Who would know who you are to me? Mo Jingshan raised his brows. Aside from throwing a tantrum, your attitude before and after drinking is basically the same. So, you don't intend to give any explanation for drinking behind my back? Why should I explain? Jinwan calmly looked at him. What I should guard against is not the problem of whether I drink or not, but my heart, right? She could not recall all the words she said that night after getting drunk, but she still had some impression of them. Even though she knew that it was not easy for him to appear, even though she knew how difficult this month had been, she still could not put down her pride. Even though some of the mistakes had come from her. But right now, she could not bring herself to smile. After being treated coldly for a month, it was as though she was placed in an icehouse. Mo Jingshan's eyes gradually revealed a faint smile. He watched as her stiffened expression was like a disobedient kitten. She was clearly soft and waiting for his touch, yet she insisted on acting stiff and forbidding. He lowered his head and moved closer to her lips. What? You're still so unreasonable now that you're awake? Jinwan rushed to move back, but the man had already kissed her. However, he only kissed her once on the lips before moving away. As she glared at him, he moved his hands away from her shoulders and placed them against the wall behind her. He lowered his eyes to stare at her. Why are you still angry? It's been a month, and you still haven't figured it out? The man stood under the kitchen light, his long shadow looming in front of her, blocking out most of the light. How would I dare to be angry? Just because you threw a tantrum, you were given the cold shoulder for a month. If I were angry because you didn't answer my call, I'm afraid you would directly draw a line with me, wouldn't you? Jinwan coldly glanced at him. Don't stand here and block me. Let me out. With that, she tried to push him away. In the end, her strength was always futile against this man. She pushed him a few times, but he didn't move an inch. Instead, the way he looked at her became deeper and deeper. She turned her eyes away, refusing to look at him. She frowned and said, Feng Ling is still injured. I don't want to talk to you about not answering my call. Compared to you stubbornly wanting to save face and purposely hanging up after one ring, which one is worse? Mo Jingshan stared at her face, speaking softly. That day, when I arrived in High City, I contacted the subsidiary company in advance. There was an emergency meeting, and after I left T University, the company's car came to pick me up. I put my phone on silent mode and placed it by the side. When I looked through the company's documents and picked up my phone, I saw that you had 2 missed calls. Jinwan did not speak, but her gaze remained unkind. Speaking of which, it's interesting. The man placed his hand against her neck. In this entire month, the first time you called, you hung up after 1 ring. The second time you called, it was already a month later. I didn't pick up, and you went to drink to drown your sorrows. Thinking about it, you're indeed living a carefree life. You can be so unrestrained when you're happy or unhappy. Even the reason you went to drink is so perfect. It was clear that these words were purposely mocking. Although the meaning behind it was not deep, it was an ironic mockery. Yet, it was aimed at her vitals. For a moment, Jinwan was speechless. Nanheng and Feng Ling were still outside. She really did not wish to cause any trouble here. Furthermore, the 2 of them had already stayed in the kitchen for long enough. It was necessary for them to leave. She was about to raise her hand to push him away again, but the man did not let go. If you still have any grievances, just say it. Don't keep it in your heart. Just say it. His gaze was too deep and too intense, binding her tightly against the wall. She couldn't escape, nor could she avoid it. Jinwan looked at Mo Jingshan, who was so close to her, and absent-mindedly recalled the feeling of not being able to touch him for a month. She gritted her teeth and said, Didn't I already say earlier? How would I dare to have any grievances? In terms of temper, my temper isn't as big as yours. In terms of ruthlessness, I'm also not as ruthless as you. As she spoke, she leaned against the wall even more. Even though the distance between them was only a few hundredths of a millimeter, she still had to move further away. However, she was still in his arms. Mo Jingshan looked at her and then at her, subconsciously resisting his intimacy. His gaze was indifferent, and he did not give her a chance to move further away. He directly leaned down, using an absolutely oppressive posture to deprive her of her freedom. He leaned closer to her lips and said in a low voice, "If you want to calm down, I'll let you calm down. Is a month a long time? Previously, didn't you say that you wanted to live apart from me for 3 months and have a so-called long-distance relationship?" Jean Wan, a month was not a long time. But a month without seeing or receiving any news from him was really a very, very long time. It was so long that she began to doubt her life. Jean Wan could not hold it in any longer. Since she had already said it to this point, there was no need to suppress it anymore. She abruptly said, "Even if what I said that day may have touched your bottom line, and you're unhappy that I don't trust you, you just left like this for a month. During this month, you just left me hanging. Do you feel at ease?" "I didn't leave you hanging." "Then why didn't you send any news for a month?" "I took the time to resolve a past that shouldn't have existed." "Resolve? Past?" Although he didn't say it directly, Jean Wan understood him. A month ago, when she questioned him about that so-called fiancé, he said that he would deal with it. So, it turned out that he went to. Chapter 234. So, it turned out that in the past month, he had gone to solve those things? How did he solve them? This man always did everything without batting an eyelid. Jean Wan had thought that he was simply angry with her and gave her the cold shoulder for a month. It turned out that he was actually so decisive. She suddenly lowered her eyes. For a moment, she didn't even know what she was angry about. In the past month, had she calmed down? She had indeed calmed down, and she was way too calm. She glanced at Mo Jingshan again. "On my birthday, you were the one who made the cake. Why didn't you tell me?" As she spoke, she puffed up her cheeks unhappily, but this unhappiness didn't come from anger. Instead, she was annoyed that because of what happened in her previous life, she was too subjective and defensive when looking at certain things. Instead, she neglected too much warmth and detail. Perhaps, she was only annoyed. "You still know that I made those cakes? When I cut them one by one, I didn't see your heart ache," the man said half-jokingly, stroking her hand. "You're not angry anymore, En? What was there to be angry about?" Jean Wan wasn't that unreasonable. She wouldn't give up a good man. Was she really going to give up this piece of meat to someone else? She wasn't a masochist. Jean Wan suddenly pulled down one of his hands that was leaning against the wall behind her. She held his palm that was much larger than her own. It was hard to imagine how he had the energy to make so many cakes for her that day. Whether it was the cream or the base cake, the taste was especially sweet and soft. This man could do everything so well. He was really impeccable. She held his hand in her palm and then held his slender fingers, whispering, "Then what do you want as compensation?" Mo Jingshan looked at her, and his eyes were full of smiles. He held her hand, lowered his head to kiss it, and then leaned over to kiss her lips. He pressed his lips against hers and said hoarsely in a low voice, "What do you think I need as compensation?" Jean Wan's body immediately softened from his kiss. She pursed her lips and said, "How about I make 21 dishes for you tonight? After you're done, you're going to throw them away right in front of me? Am I that childish?" "You mean I'm childish?" It had been a long time since Jean Wan cooked, especially after she came to Tea City. Right now, she was trying to think of ways to make up for her mistake by giving him a chance to take revenge and make him feel good. However, since he didn't appreciate her kindness, she couldn't be blamed. Suddenly, a few dong-dong sounds came from the wall outside the kitchen. Nanheng knocked on the wall a few times. "You two, don't go too far. You've been in there for so long. Do you need me to take Feng Ling away and leave this room to you?" Jean Wan subconsciously tugged on Mo Jingshan's hand, rushing to leave. However, Mo Jingshan did not move. He pulled her back and took the opportunity to hold the little woman who was leaning against the wall to maintain a distance from him. He whispered by her ear, "Giving up the room to us is not a bad choice." Jean Wan, she pressed her hand against his chest. "Feng Ling was just injured, and it's clear that she's being chased by some unknown force. After all, she's someone you hired. You have to be concerned about her safety. How can there be such a cold-blooded boss like you? With Nanheng around, she doesn't need my concern." His words were simple and straightforward. Then, he warned and commanded, "In the future, if there's any activity from unknown pursuers or foreigners, you're not allowed to get close." Although Feng Ling's skills aren't bad, her background isn't simple. When the situation is tense, what you need to do is to take care of yourself, understand? Today, when Jean Wan rushed into the alley with a baseball bat, it was probably because Feng Ling was there. She believed that Feng Ling would be able to handle it, so she had the confidence to rush in to help. Of course, she had the awareness to protect herself, but she wasn't too weak. Hiding whenever something happened wasn't her style. Of course, she wouldn't let others worry about her. "I know. When it's cold, you don't show up. When it's good, you're like a housekeeper, managing me," Jean Wan muttered. Mo Jingshan, when Jean Wan walked out of the kitchen, she saw that Feng Ling had put on her black sports coat. If it weren't for the fact that she was only wearing underwear inside and couldn't take it off, she would have taken off Nanheng's black t-shirt as well. She saw Feng Ling sitting on the sofa with the coat on, as though the person who was injured earlier was not her. Aside from the fact that her complexion was paler than usual, there was no difference. Was this the reason she had received training? She couldn't even cry out in pain and had to endure all kinds of feelings as though they had never happened? "You're finally willing to come out. I thought the two of you would stay in my kitchen until the end of time." Nanheng leaned against the wall outside the kitchen door with a cold smile. His eyes glanced at Jean Wan's expression, which had softened a lot. Without guessing, he knew that this little woman had probably been coaxed. Mo Jingshan placed his hand on Jean Wan's waist, encircling the little woman who was about to head to the sofa in his arms to prevent her from running away. He glanced at Feng Ling and the medicine box by her feet before shifting his gaze to Nanheng's side. They went in such a big circle. Was their target her or you? Nanheng's face was indifferent and he smiled lazily. "We're all working together in 11 base. Their biggest target is either me or her. What's the difference?" Mo Jingshan looked at him and said indifferently, "Your woman has been injured to this extent. You clearly want to personally uproot the nest of those trash, but now you can lean against here and smile as though nothing has happened. Even Jean Wan isn't as big-hearted as you." "Nanheng, Jean Wan? What did it have to do with her?" "Mr. Mo, I'm not his woman. Although you're my current boss, please don't put labels on me." Feng Ling spoke up, protesting unhappily. However, Mo Jingshan seemed not to hear her words and only glanced coldly at Nanheng. Nanheng was silent for a few seconds and temporarily put away his lazy attitude. These days, women are not easy to raise. Whether they're light or heavy, it's wrong to keep them by your side. It's wrong to let them go. Jean Wan didn't understand his words. Sitting on the sofa, Feng Ling's expression turned cold. Chapter 235. Although Jean Wan was held in Mo Jingshan's arms, she still silently shifted closer to him. Although she could not accurately capture the meaning of their conversation, she could still smell the faint smell of gunpowder. She had long known that Nanheng's background was not simple, and that the people involved in the arms business could not be simple either. However, she did not expect the severity of the situation to be deeper than she had imagined. In this aspect, it did not only involve the arms business, the country, and the underworld. There were many other problems that Jean Wan had not come into contact with. At this moment, she was only thinking about how Nanheng was so complicated. What exactly was his relationship with Mo Jingshan and Qin Sighting? She vaguely remembered that Qin Sighting had mentioned that he had saved Feng Ling's life in America. What about Mo Jingshan? What kind of role did he play between them? Compared to the coldness in Nanheng's eyes and Jean Wan's silent confusion, Mo Jingshan appeared especially unperturbed. The road to death is their own choice. It's not a big price to drag you down with them before they die. It was clear that Mo Jingshan was reminding them. Nanhang had naturally understood this long ago. Nanhang curved his thin lips coldly. I didn't bring Feng Ling back to the country purely to be your woman's bodyguard. Since I left her in the country, I've naturally hidden an ambush. If they want to come, they can come. I guarantee that if they come, they will die. Mo Jingshan patted Jin Wan's waist from time to time, his expression mild. Using your own woman as bait, only you, Nanhang, would do such a cold-blooded and heartless thing. Nanhang, Mr. Mo, I already knew all the missions and procedures at the base. Everything was my own choice, Feng Ling interrupted. This was probably the first time Feng Ling had spoken up for Nanhang in front of them, but her tone was clearly cold. Letting a woman protect you, is this something a man should do? Mo Jingshan ignored her, as though he was purposely provoking Nanhang, throwing a ruthless knife at him. Nanhang. The way you two are echoing each other, I almost suspect that Feng Ling has been brainwashed by your woman. When did she learn to cooperate with you? Jin Wan suddenly spoke up softly. Nanhang, Feng Ling was clearly speaking up for you earlier. Doesn't your conscience hurt when you said that? Although she did not understand the situation well, seeing Mo Jingshan, who understood the situation, criticize Nanhang in such a manner and seemed to be enjoying it, Jin Wan could not help but join in. Nanhang did not speak again. He suddenly narrowed his eyes coldly and looked meaningfully at Feng Ling. Feng Ling did not continue to say anything. She stood there in the sportswear stained with blood. By the time she left Nanhang's hotel, it was already very late. Even if T University didn't have a curfew, Jin Wan knew that she wouldn't be able to return to the dorm tonight. Mo Jingshan brought her back to T University's condominium. In the car, she asked, the solution you mentioned earlier, did you return to America last month? I have to do what I promised you. If I don't go there myself, how can I give you a perfect explanation? The man's voice was calm and low. It was one thing to guess it, but it was another to hear it from his own mouth. Jin Wan's heart immediately beat wildly from the heat. I'm not too calculative. It's just that what happened that time was too much of a shock to me. In that kind of situation, if I could still maintain my rationality and not question or vent at all, I'm afraid I wouldn't be a normal person. Or perhaps I don't care at all. However, I have no intention of forcing you to do anything, nor do I want to make things difficult for you. It's not difficult. You don't have to worry about this matter. I said I'll handle it, so I'll handle it. I definitely won't leave behind any future troubles. Jin Wan glanced at him. Did he mean that the person who wanted to snatch this piece of meat from her mouth was no longer the biggest problem? Although Mo Jingshan might be able to resolve the Gordian knot if he personally took action. But for her, wouldn't it be too unchallenging to be killed before she even saw the enemy? They alighted from the car and returned to the condominium. Mo Jingshan immediately held her hand after alighting. The man's palm coincidentally held onto her hand. She turned to assess him and found that Mo Jingshan seemed to be maintaining his original state at all times. There was never any sudden changes. Regardless of whether it was his personality or his appearance, he was very stable. That night, the reason why I was able to relax enough to drink was because I knew Feng Ling was by my side. That's why I was so at ease. Jin Wan glanced at him again. That day, you didn't really bring me away from the place where I was drinking, did you? Did you not want me to see your drunken appearance when Feng Ling helped you out? Or did you not want me to know that you were so drunk that you couldn't even recognize my face? When Mo Jingshan heard her mention the matter of drinking, he initially ignored her. Only when he pulled her into the elevator did he cast her an indifferent glance. Jin Wan, there was no need to ask. It was clear that he had indeed found her in that bar. So at that time, she couldn't even recognize his face? No, that's not right. At that time, she only thought that she had seen wrongly and thought that it was an illusion. How could she not recognize Mo Jingshan's face? After entering the elevator, Mo Jingshan swiped the elevator card and did not look at her again. Jin Wan knew that she had promised him that she would not drink anymore. In the end, she still purposely used alcohol to drown her sorrows. Mo Jingshan did not want to bicker with her over such things when he had just coaxed her. However, it was clear that he was still unhappy with her drinking. Jin Wan stood by his side and watched their figures through the elevator door mirror. When their gazes met, she directly leaned against his arm. In the future, even if I drink, I'll only drink happy alcohol and celebratory alcohol. I won't use alcohol to drown my sorrows or sulk with you anymore. The man finally raised his eyes and glanced at her through the mirror. You didn't even plan on not touching a single drop of alcohol. Happy alcohol? You sure know how many lines you'll cut off when you drink. Jin Wan pursed her lips. The elevator stopped at the apartment floor and she followed him out of the elevator. Before returning, they sat down at Nan Heng's place and had some food with everyone. Jin Wan was not hungry now. After entering the door, she turned on the light and had just changed her shoes when she saw Mo Jingshan put on the gray indoor slippers. The man who had disappeared for a whole month had returned just like that. The emptiness in her heart was instantly filled. For a moment, she couldn't tell what kind of feeling she was feeling, but inexplicably, she was relieved. Recently, Jin Wan's schedule was too unhealthy and she was used to being sleepy. After all, it was almost 11 o'clock. She took off her coat and went straight into the bathroom, planning to take a shower and go to bed. Because she was too sleepy, she didn't even soak in the bathtub but directly took a shower under the shower head. However, the bathroom door suddenly opened. She raised her sleepy face and didn't react for a moment. She only saw the man in a shirt and trousers step on the water stains on the ground and come over in the white mist. The man's arm circled her waist, and with the other hand, he turned off the bathtub and immediately picked her up by the waist. Jin Wan was a little sleepy. I haven't finished my shower yet. What are you doing? Let's shower together later. Chapter 236. Jin Wan was carried out of the bathroom by him. She didn't even have a towel, let alone clothes. Naked, she was directly brought out of the bathroom by the man. What time is it now? Although Jin Wan was sleepy, every time he touched her body, her whole body was extremely sensitive. In addition, she wasn't wearing any clothes, and the slightly cold indoor air touched her skin, making her particularly sensitive. He was going to carry her back to the bedroom, but because she was naked, Jin Wan squirmed uncomfortably in his arms. He finally couldn't restrain himself. Although he hadn't touched her for more than a month and wouldn't do anything to his lower body every day, the moment this woman pressed against his arms, the self-control Mo Jingshan was most proud of instantly disappeared. The man's sudden kiss was slightly more urgent than Jin Wan had expected. Before they reached the bedroom, he pressed her down on the long table behind the sofa with several books. Although this seemingly gentle man's style in bed was never as gentle as his appearance, Jin Wan still couldn't resist him. Mo Jingshan, be gentle, he lowered his head to kiss her. He made a vague sound and didn't show any signs of slowing down. She protested softly, let's go back to the bedroom. He kissed her lips and chuckled hoarsely. No, I can't wait. Jin Wan. It's only a few steps from the bedroom. Do you think it's necessary? Including the half a month before your birthday, I've been a vegetarian for almost a month and a half. Do you think it's necessary? The man's hot and husky breath pressed against her ear. He kissed and bit her earlobe, burning the sensitive spot on her ear. Do you think your husband is a saint? Do you think he can watch you close the door and sleep after taking a shower? But it's cold and hard here. Being stared at by the man's ink-like eyes, Jin Wan suddenly felt that she was about to burn. She forced herself to appear calm and composed, but in fact, a small flame had already leaped up in her heart, burning brighter and brighter. Just as she finished speaking, the man who had been pressing her against the table easily exerted a little force. Her entire body was suddenly turned around, and in an instant, she was leaning against the edge of the table and holding her in his arms. The man pinched her chin and kissed her again. He pried open her teeth and attacked her. He swept across her teeth even more fiercely and domineeringly than usual, bringing her into his mouth and kissing her inch by inch, not letting go of any part of her. It had indeed been a while since they were intimate. Jean Wan thought she was very calm in this regard. Although Mo Jingshan teased her until she couldn't control herself, at least the two of them had gone through the stage of inseparable entanglement. These few months of separation shouldn't be a big deal, but this sudden and different kind of stimulation, in this kind of place, in this kind of position, Mo Jingshan clearly took into consideration that it had been a while since she last did it and that it would be difficult for her to adapt. Although he was already like an arrow on the bowstring, he still patiently released her. Soft and dense kisses landed on her neck and ears. He sucked on her earlobe, bit on her collarbone, and moved downwards. Jean Wan was stimulated to the point that the corners of her eyes turned red. She bit down and was forced to shrink back. The living room light landed on her fair, delicate, and beautiful skin. She softly and hoarsely said, "Don't itch." The man ignored her. His hands slid down the white skin of her thigh. Jean Wan moaned softly and sobbed. Mo Jingshan, what did you call me? Mo Jingshan's hand paused. He darkly glanced at her. Jean Wan, hubby, it had been a while since she called him this. She couldn't react in time. In the end, her soft and delicate voice caused the man's gaze to darken. Jean Wan saw his extremely dark and thick gaze. When he looked at her, it was clear that he would not give her any leeway or chance to retreat. Tonight, he would definitely not let her off so easily. Mo Jingshan lowered his eyes, watching the woman he had been holding in his arms the entire time. Because of his teasing, she was sitting weakly on his lap. Her exquisite, fair body was exposed under the light. The veins on his forehead were about to pop. "Do you really like to call me by my full name?" His voice was terrifyingly hoarse. His head moved closer to her ear, softly and unhurriedly saying, "In a while, I'll let you shout to your heart's content. Remember not to cry." The man's brazen threat caused Jean Wan to involuntarily shrink into his embrace. She felt that there was really no way for her to sleep tonight. Without waiting for her to speak, his still mischievous fingers directly invaded her. "Even if you cry, I won't let you off." Jean Wan whimpered, unconsciously shrinking her body. Her entire body was dyed with a faint rose color. Her hands trembled as she grabbed his arm, using an undetectable amount of strength to push him away. "Wait a minute, should we first decide on a time to end? If I don't sleep for an entire night, I really won't be able to take it." "I can't wait." Mo Jingshan did not give her any chance to speak. The movement of his fingers had already brought out all of her senses, which she could no longer control. Jean Wan buried her head into his neck, her nails digging into his back. Her lower lip was bitten until there was a white mark. Her entire body was stimulated to the point that her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. A drop of water flowed out from the corner of her eyes. "I still have classes tomorrow. You're suspended from classes tomorrow." The man bit down on her neck, his voice extremely hoarse. "Suspended? What's suspended? How did you know?" "I didn't even hear about it. As an investor of T University's library, I've directly given you the title of an honorary principal. If I say that classes will be suspended tomorrow, who dares to not do so?" Jean Wan, tomorrow was the weekend, and it was true that there were only a few classes and Professor Lin's class that would occasionally have supplementary classes. Even if classes were suspended for a day, it would not have much of an impact. However, she never expected that the man who had always been so calm in the company would actually have such a domineering side for the sake of his own selfishness. If she did not feed him tonight, it was possible that T University would have to suspend classes for an entire week starting tomorrow. Jean Wan was slightly distracted. Mo Jingshan suddenly placed his hand on the back of her head, placing a gentle and light kiss on her forehead. He kissed her hair while his other finger slowly inched inwards inch by inch, causing Jean Wan's trembling whimper. Jean Wan's suppressed voice was as soft as a kitten's. Each sound crashed into his eardrums, grinding against the restraints he had forced out in order to allow her to adapt as quickly as possible. Chapter 237. The light in the living room became ambiguous. Jean-Wan could barely hold it in. He looked at her, his low chuckle causing her ears to turn red. He pressed against her waist, pressing against her slightly. Even through her clothes, she could feel the heat. She shrank back from the pressure. Afraid that she would fall, she held onto his shoulder, pressing against him even more. Mo Jingshan seemed to be able to completely control her nerves. Jean-Wan's waist softened. She wanted to close her legs but could only whimper against his neck because of this position. It was as though she was instinctively yearning for more, but also as though she was faintly resisting this surging tide of passion. Seeing her like this, Mo Jingshan could no longer hold it in and was about to press her back onto the table. He was just about to move when a voice abruptly rang by his ear. Jean-Wan's phone rang. She immediately struggled. Phone. Mo Jingshan furrowed his brows. Ignore it. As he spoke, his fingertips pressed deeper. Jean-Wan bit down on her voice and pushed his hand away. It's getting late. It's either because there's something urgent in the studio in High City or because there might be something at school. If Professor Lin has something important to inform me, it won't be good if I miss it. Mo Jingshan glanced at her. It was clear that he did not intend to let her go. However, Jean-Wan immediately tensed up in his arms. If he did not let her answer the phone now, his temper that had just calmed down would most likely surge again. He finally released some of his strength. Jean-Wan wanted to get up from his body, but her legs were too weak to move. She looked awkwardly at the phone on the sofa. Go and get it for me. Sitting on him, she ordered him around, taking advantage of the fact that she had been seduced by him. Mo Jingshan did not say anything more. He held her waist with one hand and brought her up, while the other went to the sofa to pick up the phone. Jean-Wan's whole body was still soft. She lay on him until the man sat on the sofa with her in his arms. She leaned over and was about to hide, but he didn't let go at all. As he handed the phone to her, he still let her sit on his lap and signaled her to take it with his eyes. Jean-Wan was helpless. Without looking at the caller ID, she put the phone to her ear. Hello? The little woman in his arms had just been stimulated, and her eyes were watery. Her lips had also been kissed until they were dark red, and her chest was faintly discernible. Her long, undried hair was tangled around her body like seaweed. What a vixen. Mo Jingshan's Adam's apple bobbed. He decided to close his eyes and place his hand on his brow. He leaned against the sofa and patiently waited for her to finish her call. His lower body was tightly pressed against hers, and the hardness that could not be ignored was pressed against her through the fabric. Jean-Wan did not dare to move. Ling Feifei's questioning voice abruptly came through the phone. Jean-Wan, why didn't you and Feng Ling return to the dormitory today? Although Jean-Wan and Ling Feifei did not have a good relationship, she never had to explain her whereabouts to anyone. For Ling Feifei to suddenly call to question her in the middle of the night, Jean-Wan instinctively felt that it was strange. I'm outside, what's wrong? Is something the matter? Jean-Wan patiently asked. It's nothing much. It's just that a diamond watch I bought before coming to T-City has disappeared. A few days ago, it was still in the dormitory. Yesterday, it suddenly disappeared. I originally wanted to ask if you guys saw it, but in the past 2 days, you and Feng Ling coincidentally didn't come back to stay. I can't help but be suspicious. So, when are you guys coming back? Ling Feifei's tone was unkind. Jean-Wan was extremely annoyed with people like Ling Feifei. There was not a single day where she could rest. How could there be so many problems? What diamond watch? She had never even seen one before. Could it be that she had been unhappy for a while and was thinking of ways to frame someone and create more trouble? She was quiet for a moment before coldly saying, Do I look like I'd be interested in a diamond watch that's worth at most 100,000, or would Feng Ling be interested in something that's embedded with diamonds? Wouldn't you call the police if you lost something? Calling me, are you hoping to find it in my cabinet or bag? Don't you think your motive is too deliberate? The person on the other side of the phone seemed to choke from her precise words. After several seconds of silence, she abruptly reprimanded, in any case, there are only these few people in the dormitory. Usually, no one comes in. So what if you can afford to buy a gown that's worth $1 million? What if that's all your savings? I've seen people who borrow money to act cool, let alone someone like you. Who knows if you're using all your money to act cool? My watch is lost, but where are you and Feng Ling right now? Even if I want to call the police, I have to call you suspects back. Otherwise, if you guys escape, where am I going to find you? Crazy. It's none of your business when I go back, but you have to remember that both my and Feng Ling's cabinets have a separate password lock, and the number of times it can be opened is limited. When the password lock is opened, the connected phone software will also record it. Once my and Feng Ling's cabinets have been opened in the past few days and what was put in them, the police may find out. Are you sure you want to play such childish tricks? The person on the other side of the phone fell silent. Just as Jean Wan was about to hang up, he angrily hung up first. Why were there always people in this world who liked to find trouble? Did their brains grow under their feet, or did they think they were too scheming and could easily be pinched like a bun? However, Jean Wan was not in the mood to consider whether he was stupid or not. She threw her phone back on the sofa and put her hands on the man's chest. Her legs were still a little weak. She was about to jump out of his arms when she had just calmed down, but the man abruptly pressed her back down. What call did you pick up? Mo Jingshan clearly saw the impatience and disgust in Jean Wan's eyes. It was rare to see her show such obvious dislike towards someone. A lunatic in the dormitory. I don't know if she has persecutory delusions or likes to mindlessly make her presence known. Ignore her. I can't be bothered to mention such a person. Jean Wan had just answered when she felt the man's body pressing closer and closer. Jean Wan's emotions and feelings that had slightly moved away were instantly pulled back by his action. She watched as he held her waist with one hand and unbuttoned his clothes with the other. The buttons of his shirt were unbuttoned by him single-handedly. This visual effect was truly indescribably seductive. Especially the man's gaze, which was very deep and dark. Are you really not going to return to the bedroom? Earlier, he clearly waited for her to answer the phone. Chapter 238. I'll go back in a bit. The man had yet to finish speaking when Jean Wan's leg was abruptly held by him. Her vision suddenly spun as she was pressed against the sofa by the man. She raised her eyes to meet the man's dark and deep eyes. In an instant, she actually began to stutter. You, control yourself, however, before she could finish her words, the man had already grabbed her ankle, which was forced up by this position, and abruptly pounced on her. He held her chin and kissed her face. Jean Wan's hair was messy, and her face was flushed. She was so charming that it was indescribable. Soft moans escaped from her mouth. It was as though she was enjoying it, but at the same time, it was as though she was being tortured. She subconsciously clenched the sofa beneath her. The man bent down to kiss her sweaty face. His voice was tight and hoarse as he pressed against her soft lips, asking vaguely, "Did you miss me?" N. Right now, Jean Wan could no longer understand what he was referring to. Are you still going to throw a tantrum with me in the future? N. How can I guarantee that my emotions will always be at the same level? It can't be that I won't even allow you to throw a tantrum. You can throw a tantrum, but you can't throw a tantrum, especially when it's related to misunderstandings. If you can clear it up, then clear it up. You're not allowed to lock yourself in the room again, and you're not allowed to let your imagination run wild. At such a time, the man was shockingly calm. Although his voice was hoarse, he slammed against the sofa even harder, causing Jean Wan's mind to go blank. She was completely unable to hear what he was saying. Mo Jingshan controlled his temper and asked hoarsely again, "Are you still going to lock yourself in the room and not come out?" This time, Jean Wan roughly heard it clearly. She opened her eyes slightly and looked at the man above her. His eyes were like the surging waves of the boundless ocean. They were heavy and focused on her body. Jean Wan looked at his gaze and felt as though she was about to drown. Her heart beat wildly. Sorry. Jean Wan felt that she really wasn't rational enough at that time. Previously, she was stubborn and wanted to save her face. Right now, even that bit of temper that she shouldn't have was gone. He bent down and pressed his lips against hers. It was a very light, delicate, and gentle kiss. The sensations beneath her grew more intense with each layer, almost drowning her. Jean Wan raised her arms and wrapped them around the man's neck with some difficulty. She pressed her burning face against his chin, her voice tender and soft with hints of naturalness and tenderness. "I love you." Mo Jingshan's movements did not stop. In fact, he became even more ferocious and intense than before. When he heard these two words, he looked at her, and his ink-black gaze deepened. He suddenly kissed her again, stealing away her breath. Jean Wan. After starving for so long, she knew that she could not help. Jean Wan didn't know which of her words had agitated him, but those two words suddenly spilled out of her mouth based on her feelings. Afterward, she almost forgot what she had said to him, but this night, she was tormented from inside out by this man. In the end, when she was so stimulated that she almost lost her voice from crying, the man abruptly bit her lips, swallowed her hoarse voice, and pressed her firmly into his arms. The next morning, Mo Jingshan's biological clock was earlier and more punctual than Jean Wan's. Although Jean Wan slept soundly in his arms, when the man rose, she still felt something. However, she was too tired to open her eyes. The man who had just gotten up gently lifted the quilt and got up so as not to wake her up. He seemed to have been watching her for a long time. The two of them had been together for a long time. Even if Jean Wan didn't open her eyes, she could feel the man's gaze on her face. He was very focused and did not move away for a long time. Just when she was half asleep and considering whether she should get up directly, the man kissed her on the face and got out of bed. This sense of security allowed Jean Wan's tired heart to regain its footing. She hugged the blanket and turned over to continue sleeping. It was already past 8 o'clock when he finished showering, changed his clothes, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for her. When he returned to the bedroom, the woman on the bed had already sat up, but she still had a sleepy expression on her face. Her hair was messy and scattered behind her shoulders, and she was wearing the nightgown he had helped her change into last night after taking a shower. Jean Wan really did not have enough sleep. Last night, this man was really too cruel and inhumane. However, right now, she was indeed hungry. She smelled the scent of breakfast, and it was even made by Great Boss Missouri himself. Just the smell alone was enough to entice her to wake up. Mo Jingshan casually buttoned his sleeves, walking toward the bed with his long legs. "You're awake? Get up and wash up. Have breakfast." Jean Wan raised her sleepy eyes. "Can I come back to sleep for a while after breakfast?" When she raised her eyes, she saw that the man had already finished washing up. His black shirt was different from the white one from yesterday, but it was still incomparably handsome. His well-dressed appearance made it hard for one to associate him with the energetic and unrestrained beast from last night. He was as clean and handsome as ever, perfect to the point of being impeccable. "Get up and eat first. After eating, walk around the room to digest before sleeping. Otherwise, you'll get indigestion." The man most likely knew how bad he was last night and did not force her to get up. He said in a heavy voice, "The breakfast is still warm. Do you want to wait until it's cold before eating?" Jean Wan rushed to remove the blankets. The soreness between her legs was too obvious. She stood up and changed her posture several times before finally finding a more comfortable position to walk out. "Classes are really suspended today?" When she walked to the dining table, she saw the long-awaited Mo Jingshan breakfast. She yawned as she reluctantly went to wash up. She could only eat after washing up. Classes are suspended. So you can continue sleeping at home. There's no need to worry about whether you'll miss Professor Lin's class. The man placed the cutlery on the table. Jinwan stood in the bathroom to brush her teeth. There was clearly a bathroom in the bedroom. Although she had seen this side of Mo Jingshan before, it was truly rare. She really wanted to see it, so she stood there and brushed her teeth while watching the man's back view under the morning sun. After washing up, they sat down to eat. Mo Jingshan understood her appetite very well. He made just enough food for 2 people. However, after eating with him, Jinwan did not move from her seat. She looked at the man who was about to take the dishes to the dishwasher and raised her face to say, "I'm not full yet. I want to eat another bowl of noodles." "A small bowl is fine too, dash." Chapter 239. Jinwan was clearly acting coquettishly, even her tone was soft. Mo Jingshan rubbed her head. "Are you sure?" Jinwan nodded. "I'm sure." If Mo Jingshan's memory was correct, the amount of food she ate for breakfast was just right. However, from her expression, it seemed like she was not full yet. "What kind of noodles do you want to eat?" "Anything is fine as long as you cook it." "Are you sure you can still eat?" He did not ask further. "Wait, I'll go cook." Jinwan was really not purposely acting coquettishly. After being tormented by the man for an entire night, it was only right for her to ask for some interest. Furthermore, her appetite had increased significantly recently. Although her weight did not increase and she was still as thin as before, every bowl of Mo Jingshan's breakfast made of love counted. After all, it was something that could only be chanced upon. 3 days later. "Jinwan, it's been several days since you've returned to the dormitory. You mustn't be late for Professor Lin's morning class today. I heard from Professor Lin that the person who invested in T University's library has officially become our school's honorary principal. This morning, there will be a meeting with the school leaders in front of all the teachers and students. The honorary principal should also say a few words. I'm not sure what the situation will be like today, but right now, the students around me are all very excited. You must remember not to be late." Bai Wei kept urging her over the phone. "Jinwan, I understand. I'll be there soon. Hurry up, you can't be absent today." All right. I'll be there soon." Jinwan hung up the phone while glancing at the so-called T University's newly appointed honorary principal who was resting with his eyes closed in the back of the car. Bai Wei's call was naturally to remind her not to be absent. After all, the Mo Corporation's status in the country was not simple. For the business and enterprise management students, to have the opportunity to interact with the rumored CEO Mo was indeed a grand event that they could not miss. "You'll be going to T University today?" She looked at the man and asked with some hesitation. Mo Jingshan glanced at her and reached out to pull her in. He kissed her face and warmly said, "I was strongly requested by your school leader to speak a few words. I'm not interested in such an occasion, but since I've already given T University so much face for you, I'll do my best to see it through to the end." That's right. After all, since Mo Jingshan had agreed to invest in T University, he wasn't joking. No matter what, he had already shouldered the responsibility for this matter. Besides, he was already an investor on the board of directors and an honorary principal. If he didn't give T University any face, he would basically be treating the school leaders like playthings. Jinwan could see that Mo Jingshan was considerate and polite to the managers of the education industry, so she wouldn't embarrass them too much. At this time, the driver was driving, and Jinwan and Mo Jingshan were in the back row. Mo Jingshan didn't let go of her after hugging her, nor did he let her go back to her seat. When he passed by a traffic light intersection, his phone rang. When they reached a traffic light, Mo said. He answered the call. After crossing the intersection, they had already arrived at T University. Jean Wan saw that she was going to be late. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was on the phone, she did not waste any time. She threw him a glance, nodded politely at the driver, and got out of the car. Mo Jingshan listened to the call. A moment later, he was quiet and indifferent. Where are they now? Hearing the reply, Mo Jingshan's gaze was calm and unruffled. I got it. Jean Wan thought he was going to have a meeting. In the end, all the teachers and students entered T University's largest stadium at the same time. The 7,000 to 8,000 students were all seated. She did not expect there to be such a big crowd. As expected, no matter how low-key Mo Jingshan was, his status was still there. If someone wanted to invite him to say a few words, they did not dare to put on a show for fear of being neglected. But there were too many people. T University Stadium had a capacity of around 15,000 people. Right now, half of the seats were filled with students. The other half was covered by a curtain, and only this half was open. Because they were basking in Professor Lin's light, the students in his class were all seated in the first 3 rows. They could clearly see the person on the stage. Behind them, several students were discussing in low voices. I wonder what the legendary CEO Mo looks like. I heard he's very handsome. Haven't you seen CEO Mo's photo? He's already very handsome. Ah, do you have a photo of him? I haven't been able to find it. Most of the photos I've found on the internet are from his side profile or from a blurry angle taken by business reporters. I've never seen his face, but just his side profile is already very mesmerizing. I reckon he's super handsome. He has to be super handsome. Do you think that Hai Cheng's 2 male gods, Nanchin and Bei Mo, are just rumors? Then hurry and show me the photo. I don't have any either. It's only from his side profile, but I've studied every angle. It's enough to confirm that CEO Mo is a 360-degree man with no blind spots. He's so handsome that it's suffocating. They were still whispering to each other, but Jean Wan glanced at the school leaders on the stage, and the corners of her lips curled up slightly. In fact, there were times when a student's world was very simple. Although she did not like it when her man was stared at by various women who drooled over him, right now, she really felt as though she was sitting among her husband's fangirls. Even Bai Wei, who was usually calm and collected, was clearly filled with strong anticipation as she sat by Jean Wan's side. There was no need to mention Ling Feifei, who sat by the side. Her eyes were about to pierce through the curtains, wanting to drill in to see if the legendary CEO Mo had arrived. T-City could not be compared to High City. No matter what, the people here did not interact much with the Mo Corporation. Even in High City, there was basically no chance of meeting Mo Jingshan. However, at the very least, the people there had a good understanding of the Mo Corporation's background. Although Mo Jingshan had many fangirls, most of the unmarried young ladies in High City had already seen through reality. They knew that this man was unattainable. Although there were still a few weirdos who persisted in finding trouble with Jean Wan, they were basically negligible existences. Seeing that the school leaders were still speaking, everyone sat quietly and chatted for a while before feeling bored. They did not know when CEO Mo would come out. After watching for a while, Bai Wei also turned toward Ling Feifei. She casually asked, "You said you lost that diamond watch for several days. Have you found it?" "Not yet." When Ling Feifei answered, her gaze suddenly seemed to inadvertently shift toward Jean Wan. Jean Wan, on the other hand, calmly and coldly looked back at her, meeting her gaze. Only then did Ling Feifei quickly turn away, no longer meeting her gaze. Chapter 240. At this moment, the lights in the stadium suddenly dimmed. The school leaders on the stage used an extremely solemn tone to welcome the honorary principal. After the thunderous applause, there was a moment of silence. No one dared to make a sound. He was clearly her husband, but at this moment, Jean Wan actually felt a little nervous under such an atmosphere. This was the first time she had seen Mo Jingshan in such an occasion. She did not know what kind of serious and cold role he would play here today. When Mo Jingshan's figure finally appeared on the stage, almost all the young ladies below the stage sucked in a breath. The man who was eagerly invited onto the stage by several school leaders was already standing on the podium on the right side of the stage. In front of him was the podium, behind him was a large screen with T University's logo against a blue sky. On the screen were soaring white clouds. Mo Jingshan was wearing a white shirt, but it was not swallowed by the white on the screen. Instead, it was especially eye-catching. He was not as Jinwan had imagined. She had thought that he would be dressed in a strict and cold black suit today. She had thought that he would use the most decisive and ruthless methods to catch people off guard in certain important meetings. She had thought that with the title of honorary principal, he would wear a suit and tie like the other school leaders and even hold a microphone in his hand with a solemn expression. But he did not. He was dressed casually in a shirt and trousers. It did not seem deliberate at all. One of the expensive and exquisite buttons on his collar was casually undone, and his sleeves were rolled up to his forearms. Although Mo Jingshan was in a high position, he was still the youngest and most outstanding person in the country's upper class. With his own ability, he had built up the Mo Corporation in just a few years. Furthermore, with his own strategies and means, he had squeezed into the highest position in the country's business world. He was a business god whose net worth was unattainable by countless people. Furthermore, behind him stood the Mo family in America's Shine Group, which were both extremely important. Everything related to Mo Jingshan was a vast number of figures and the country's unfathomable domestic business system. Yet, his appearance at this moment was extremely casual and indifferent. Oh my God, so handsome. Around them, soft sighs of admiration could be heard. Some people were even discussing Mo Jingshan's age. Some said that Mo Jingshan appeared to be around the same age as most of the male students in T University, while others said that a man like Mo Jingshan, who was at the peak of his career, should be at least 30 years old and only looked young. Right now, Jin Wan was the only one who knew the exact answer. Most university graduates were around 23 years old. Mo Jingshan was only 3 years older than them. Many of the students present were those who had been held back or re-enrolled. They were around the same age as him, but they were still under the school's management. Their appearances and experiences were simple and ordinary. Even the school hunks of T University's female students paled in comparison to him. However, the man on the stage was very low-key and simple even today. The man was so clean that he didn't even need to do any styling. Under the stage lights, his deep, pitch-black brows and eyes were beautiful and distinct. It was completely indescribable with words. Such a man couldn't be replicated by anyone. This man stood there, only a faint smile, but in an instant, other than him, the sun and moon lost their light. Everyone, this is the first time we've met. Mo Jingshan stood behind the podium that was commonly seen in schools. He held the microphone on it, one hand casually resting on the podium while the other gently raised the microphone. His pale lips carried 3 parts of a smile and 7 parts of calmness and indifference. The man's tone was casual and not deliberate at all. It was as if he was not invited to speak, but as if he was facing a group of young people who had yet to officially step into society. He put down his identity and gave everyone a simple smile in a polite and approachable manner. He said, "I'm Mo Jingshan." With just this sentence, the audience immediately applauded thunderously. Jin Wan also rushed to applaud. However, looking at the man who was the center of attention on the stage, looking at his otherworldly calm and indifference, looking at this well-dressed man, she inexplicably recalled the scene last night when she was pressed down on the bed by him. She really couldn't see any trace of him being fierce to her in bed for the past few nights. What kind of man was he exactly? He could calmly control the overall situation in the company. The life and death of many small and medium-sized enterprises and many business strategies were in his hands. He clearly had a pair of hands that could move clouds and rain with one turn of the hand. Yet, he was very close to Nanhang, a person who had a complicated background and was wandering on the fringes of the foreign arms business. Furthermore, he could stand here with the title of T University's honorary principal. I'm very grateful to all the students of T University for coming here and having a pleasant and simple meeting with me. Everyone below the stage was quiet. The boys looked up at the man standing at the top, each of them thinking about whether they would one day have such an achievement. The girls looked up at the man, but at the same time, they were also tempted and drooling. As everyone knows, T University is the most high-end institution of higher learning in the country. It nurtures numerous talents for the country's economy and various large enterprises. From now on, MO Corporation will not only invest in the reconstruction of T University's century-old library, but we have also reached an agreement with T University to choose T University as our first choice in the future's recruitment fairs. At this point, MO Jingshan's smiling gaze shifted to Jean Wan, who was sitting in the third row in front of him. Jean Wan's position was not particularly obvious, but the man's gaze had already landed on her face. In the gymnasium that held several thousand people, everyone was looking seriously at the man on the stage. However, because of his gaze, the solemn crowd suddenly began to whisper among themselves. They were all asking, what was CEO Mo looking at? Which direction was he looking at? The school leaders also subconsciously looked in that direction because of his gaze. However, the lights on the stage were too dim. They could not make out the students' faces and could not tell who he was looking at. While everyone was curious, Mo Jingshan calmly withdrew his gaze. He unhurriedly curved his lips into a perfect curve and raised his hand to indicate for everyone to stay focused. In an instant, Jean Wan's heart that had been raised to her throat slowly calmed down. Chapter 241. His actions immediately attracted everyone's attention. They were originally wondering who CEO Mo was looking at earlier, but now, they had all raised their heads to stare unwaveringly at him. Jean Wan was suddenly very nervous. Previously, she had clearly said that she did not want to expose anything in these few months at T University. However, Mo Jingshan's earlier glance was really too dangerous. Ling Feifei, who was seated by Jean Wan's side, already felt her heart churning. She recalled that earlier, CEO Mo seemed to be looking at her. Ling Feifei wondered if CEO Mo was looking at her earlier. She shyly raised her hand to press against her cheeks. She was so agitated that her hands were trembling. The students seated here must have grown tired of hearing the so-called official words in your more than 10 years of student life. What's more, you're tired of listening to the various polite speeches you've long memorized. Mo Jingshan's voice was clear and indifferent. Very good. If you're not willing to listen, I'm not willing to speak. The group of students below the stage immediately laughed. Great Boss Mo's words had really struck straight at their hearts. I'm a businessman, and I travel the business world. In the past 2 years, I've indeed been invited by several local business universities to be a visiting professor in the management department or business department. However, I've rejected them all. I really don't have the time or energy. Teaching and educating people is a noble profession. An executioner like me, who has mingled in a bloody business world, is not suitable for it. Everyone below the stage held their breaths to listen. This is T University. The majority of those seated here are aiming for the business department. In the future, a large portion of you will also be involved in the business world. The reason why I use the words bloody business is naturally not to frighten you. You'll be learning all sorts of knowledge here. I don't need to elaborate on what you're all aiming for by enrolling here. After all, T University's full name has the word business behind it. This isn't a playground, but a military camp for war preparations outside of the battlefield. Since I've already been given the title of an honorary principal, I should be mainly encouraging you. However, as I've said earlier, you've heard enough official words. Mo Jingshan's tone changed, and his faint smile abruptly disappeared. This is the reserve base for domestic business talents. Everyone has a dream, but if it's so easy to reach your dreams, you wouldn't have gone through so many trials and gone through so many difficulties to obtain a letter of acceptance. Do you think that just because you've entered T University, there will already be famous companies waving at you? Do you think that just because you've entered T University, you'll naturally be able to inherit your family's business? Mo Jingshan chuckled. You're wrong. To enter this place, you have to put in 10 times the effort. Furthermore, this is just the beginning. The laughter of the girls below the stage gradually died down, and the light in the eyes of the boys also changed a little. Do you think you can spread your wings and soar after graduating? He laughed again. In the big melting pot of the shopping mall, where people kill without spilling blood, only 1 out of 100 people can stand. No one below the stage was laughing anymore. What do you want to do here? Aside from learning basic skills, you also need to train your heart. In this short period of time, there are already some who are destined to be eliminated. If you don't want to be eliminated, start working hard today. At least it's better than being chased off the stage. You'll be able to grasp the tail of opportunity better. This was a psychological attack. After all, the students who were able to enter T University all thought of themselves as very capable and proud. There were also many business students who had their eyes on the top of their heads and thought that they were unparalleled in the world. Only this kind of psychological attack would be able to get them to listen. It was also the most effective type. Initially, the school leaders were scared witless, thinking that CEO Mo was here to tear them down. However, after listening to the end, they finally put on smiles of admiration and joy. Amidst the silence, only Jin-won smiled. To be able to speak so patiently to a group of students, she had truly witnessed another side of Mo Jingshan. She did not laugh out loud, nor was it very sudden. However, Mo Jingshan's gaze suddenly landed on her face. The faint smile on the man's lips did not diminish, but the color of his eyes deepened. After pausing for a moment, he smiled slightly and aimed at the microphone, asking clearly, the female student in the 3rd row, 5 seats away from Professor Lin, can you tell me, why are you smiling? Jin-won, translator, Henyi Translations editor, Henyi Translations in the silent stadium. The thousands of students immediately turned their gazes to the direction of the 3rd row, searching for the person 5 seats away from Professor Lin. The people in the back row couldn't see clearly, and the people in the front row couldn't see clearly because the lights were too dim. Only those closest to Jin-won were able to accurately direct their gazes toward Jin-won's face. Amidst the silence, Jin-won watched the smiling man on the stage. He was smiling, but in her heart, she was gritting her teeth. He did it on purpose. Thus. Intentionally. This speech was indeed not very official. From the initial blow to the final uplifting speech, it was truly fascinating. When Mo Jingshan placed the microphone down and turned to leave the stage, there were still many students who wished for him to continue speaking. The school leaders once again began to speak about various official pleasantries. After another half an hour, they finally ended. The students all rushed out of the stadium. Jin-won was originally about to leave with everyone when Ling Feifei suddenly turned back. Her sharp eyes caught sight of Mo Jingshan, who was currently speaking with the school leaders behind the curtains. Seeing that Mo Jingshan had not left, she abruptly and quietly turned back by herself. Bai Wei saw Ling Feifei's stealthy and sneaky movements and turned to look at her. At the same time, she also noticed the scene behind the curtains. Jin-won, Bai Wei softly called out to Jin-won, gently tapping her arm. Jin-won, what is it? Look behind you. Bai Wei lowered her voice. Jin-won raised her brows and turned back. After taking a glance, she understood. These few days, she's lost her diamond watch and stirred up other things. Clearly, she's trying to find fault with you, and Feng Ling didn't come today, so I'm afraid she'll take advantage of the fact that the school leaders are here to say something about you. She's really too unreliable. She can easily splash dirty water on others. Come, let's follow her to take a look. Bai Wei held Jin-won's hand and turned to head back. Jin-won did not mind this. Ling Feifei's brainless actions were not worth her concern. However, seeing that Ling Feifei was clearly heading in Mo Jingshan's direction, she did not reject and turned back with Bai Wei. Chapter 242. Whatever you do, we'll do the same. Our legs are on everyone's bodies. Are we not allowed to come over? Bai Wei calmly retorted. Ling Feifei. Her expression was unhappy as she turned back to look at Mo Jingshan. The curtains and screens had already been removed. The students had either left or were queuing up by the entrance. Only Jin Wan, Bai Wei, and Ling Feifei remained below the stage. They appeared suspicious and immediately attracted the attention of the school leaders. Jin Wan, Bai Wei, and Ling Feifei stood below the stage. The few of you, why aren't you leaving the stadium? What are you looking at? The school leaders immediately turned back to look at them in dissatisfaction. Hurry up and leave. Don't peek here. Ling Feifei rushed to speak up. Headmaster, we still have some doubts about what CEO Mo said earlier. We wish to discuss it with CEO Mo. Originally, she should have said, I, but Ling Feifei ended up saying, we, giving the opportunity to be scolded to Jin Wan and Bai Wei. Bai Wei silently rolled her eyes. Jin Wan slightly raised her brows. Mo Jingshan only glanced over there. When he caught a glimpse of Jin Wan's figure among them, he remained calm and turned around. What do you want to discuss? Jin Wan's eyes were still calm. What do you want to discuss? Ling Feifei did not expect that after President Mo heard her words, he would actually take notice. She immediately ignored the glare of the school leaders and quickly walked over. Hello, President Mo. I'm a business management student taught by Professor Lin. My name is Ling Feifei. My family is from the Ling Corporation Bank. After hearing her name, Mo Jingshan had already turned to look at the other two people who had yet to approach. Seeing that CEO Mo was looking at them, Ling Feifei's heart was filled with displeasure. However, she forced a smile and said, those two are in the same class as me. They also live in the same dormitory. Like me, they're both Professor Lin's students. The school leaders saw that these female students were clearly here to pester or spout nonsense. They were about to step forward to stop them when Mo Jingshan's gaze caused them to retreat. Oh. They're all Professor Lin's students? Mo Jingshan smiled. It seemed like when CEO Mo mentioned the person 5 seats away from Professor Lin, he did not pay attention to Jin Wan's appearance at all. It had only been a short while, but he did not recognize that they were the ones sitting very close to Professor Lin. The smile on Ling Feifei's face deepened. She suddenly said sweetly, CEO Mo, I really don't quite understand what you just said. If you're not busy, would you mind having a meal together? The school leaders, Bai Wei, Jin Wan, this was too brazen. Jin Wan had met a lot of rivals in love, but no matter which one of them was, at least, scheming. She had never met anyone who directly asked to have dinner with Mo Jingshan in front of her. Compared to the speechless expressions of the others, Mo Jingshan casually glanced at Ling Feifei, asking without emotion, if you have anything to say, just ask. Why do we need to eat? It's almost noon now. President Mo must be hungry. Anyway, it's time for lunch. Let's talk while eating. Ling Feifei smiled sweetly, as though she thought that her beauty could move the man before her. Although Jin Wan and Bai Wei approached, Jin Wan did not speak. Instead, she wore a slight smile on her face as she watched this scene. It was as though she wanted to watch Mo Jingshan's show. That's true. It's indeed almost noon. The school leaders suddenly interjected. CEO Mo, we've already arranged a place for lunch. The other school leaders and leaders from the city's education department will be coming. Why don't you join us for lunch? Hearing the school leaders' interference, Ling Feifei could not pull a long face even if she wanted to. She thought for a moment and suddenly reached out to pull Jin Wan over, saying, CEO Mo, my roommate is also from High City. Although she's only the manager of a small studio in High City, she doesn't have many opportunities to meet you. However, she actually managed to meet you in T City, which is thousands of miles away from High City. Isn't this a rare fate? CEO Mo, give me some face. Let's go for lunch together. Jean Wan was about to push her away when she heard her next words, and her lips trembled. She subtly pushed Ling Feifei's hand away and turned her gaze to Mo Jingshan. The man looked at her meaningfully and asked with a light smile, "You're from High City?" "Jean Wan, CEO Mo is asking you a question." "Are you scared, silly? Hurry up and answer." Ling Feifei reached out to pull Jean Wan, but Jean Wan purposely kept her distance. When she reached out, she returned to Bai Wei's side. To avoid awkwardness, Ling Feifei smiled and turned to look at Mo Jingshan. "CEO Mo, don't mind them. My roommates are all shy. Actually, they really want to have a chance to talk to you." Mo Jingshan held back a smile as he glanced at Jean Wan. When he withdrew his gaze, he did not look at Ling Feifei again. At the same time, the school leaders came over to say, "CEO Mo, the leaders from the education department and the principal are already preparing to head to the restaurant. Do you want to go with them? I'll be staying in Tea City for a period of time. There's still plenty of time for me to eat with the school leaders." "There's no rush," Mo Jingshan calmly said. "Many years ago, when I was studying abroad, I've long heard about the university cafeterias in the country. Since it's already lunchtime, and since my classmates have invited me so warmly, why don't I follow you to Tea University's cafeteria for a walk and have lunch here? How about it?" Tea University's cafeteria? Ling Feifei's dream of sitting with CEO Mo in a certain Western restaurant was instantly shattered. Bai Wei, who had not interjected all this while, finally spoke up. "CEO Mo, if you really have such plans, Tea University's cafeteria is naturally the best choice. The chefs in Tea University's cafeteria are really skilled. It can be said that they are better than any other university's cafeteria in the country. Do you want to try it with us?" The school leaders were about to collapse. What kind of god was Mo Jingshan? In the end, he refused to stay in the 7-star hotel that the school leaders had arranged for him. Right now, he didn't even want to go to the best restaurant the school had arranged for him. He actually wanted to squeeze into the cafeteria with a bunch of students. What kind of taste was this? Or was it some kind of hobby? However, Mo Jingshan had already personally spoken. The school leaders originally wanted to tactfully mention it again. In the end, under Bai Wei's polite invitation, Mo Jingshan lightly curved his lips. "All right. Students, please lead the way." Seeing that Mo Jingshan really wanted to go to the cafeteria, Ling Feifei had never eaten in a cafeteria ever since she came to Tea University. Even if the food was said to be good, she felt that the food in this type of cafeteria could not be too clean. The quality was also average, so she had never gone there. But now. Chapter 243. The school leaders were afraid of neglecting him and originally planned to follow Mo Jingshan. However, the moment they lifted their feet, they heard Mo Jingshan's words before he left. "It's enough with these students leading the way. You guys should go do what you need to do. There's no need to come with us." Mo Jingshan did not plan on letting them follow him. The school leaders were not foolish. They could tell his intentions and did not follow him. After thinking about it carefully, they felt that the 3 female students wouldn't be able to stir up any trouble in front of Mo Jingshan. Even if the 3 female students had any unruly ideas, they wouldn't be able to hide from people like Mo Jingshan. They didn't need to worry too much about it. There were indeed many people in the cafeteria. Due to Mo Jingshan's sudden appearance, the students in the cafeteria were in an uproar. Although the school leaders did not dare to follow them, they still sent security guards to maintain order in the cafeteria. The students who were rushing toward them were all chided by the security guards to return to the cafeteria and queue up. Not a single one of them was allowed to walk around Mo Jingshan. After Mo Jingshan entered, he calmly scanned the surroundings and stood at the back of the crowd. Seeing that the great CEO Mo was actually queuing up in the cafeteria, the people in front took the initiative to give up their spots. Mo Jingshan thanked them but did not go over. He remained standing in his original spot. Right now, Jin Wan and Bai Wei stood behind Ling Feifei, while Ling Feifei stood behind Mo Jingshan. Furthermore, she purposely stood very close to him. There were 2 people between Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan. There were quite a number of people who wanted to give up their spots. Gradually, some of them were embarrassed to stand in front of Mo Jingshan. Seeing that Mo Jingshan did not move to the front, they all consciously moved to the back. The long queue gradually shortened until they became the center of the line. The people in front who were almost there did not pay much attention to the back. After all, there were several lines here. Some people did not give up their spots. Ling Feifei saw that these people were not aware of it and suddenly walked to the front, rudely chasing them to the back. When the people in front realized that CEO Mo was queuing with them, they rushed to the back of the line. Mo Jingshan's indifferent gaze swept past them. He spoke to the spoiled Ling Feifei in an unperturbed and emotionless voice. If you don't have the awareness to line up properly, you should at least learn not to decide for me whether to stand at the front or the back after I've already made my intentions clear. You don't have the right to chase away anyone who's queuing according to the rules. Ling Feifei, who had been proudly showing off to everyone that she was the closest to CEO Mo, was suddenly scolded by Mo Jingshan's expressionless and cold voice. She immediately bit her lips heavily, her brows showing a hint of unhappiness and stubbornness. CEO Mo, I'm only doing this so that you can quickly taste the canteen's food. Furthermore, your time is precious. Lining up is too much of a waste of time. That's why I want everyone to consciously give up their spots. Mo Jingshan coldly and indifferently said, then you'd better learn to put away your self-righteous thoughts. Ling Feifei had initially thought that CEO Mo had a slight impression of her, which was why he had agreed to have a meal together. He had even lowered himself to come to T University's canteen. She did not expect that he would not give her any face. Ling Feifei felt extremely embarrassed. However, there were so many people watching. Furthermore, Mo Jingshan was the honorary principal. It was not too bad for a student to be lectured by a principal. She quickly suppressed her emotions and lowered her head to apologize. I'm sorry. I'll be more careful in the future. I won't act on my own. As she spoke, she consciously returned to the line. Bai Wei and Jin Wan were very close. Jin Wan heard Bai Wei use a voice that only she could hear to say, serves you right. Although Ling Feifei indeed deserved it, Jin Wan's attention was never on Ling Feifei. Ever since they left the stadium, she had been trying to find an opportunity to meet Mo Jingshan's gaze. She wanted to ask him if he was serious. Was he really going to T University's canteen? However, the man did not place his gaze on her again. She could not find an opportunity to meet his gaze. Now that there were 2 people between them, there was no chance for her to ask what exactly he was planning. Was he trying to make her heart, which was currently beating wildly, suffer a heart attack? After much difficulty, they finally managed to queue up to buy the canteen's set meal. Another student took the initiative to give up a clean table for them. After Mo Jingshan sat down, Ling Feifei rushed to sit by his side. However, Bai Wei took the seat first. Of course, she maintained an appropriate distance and did not cross the line. Ling Feifei was exasperated. She took the tray in her hands and sat across from Mo Jingshan. However, the moment she approached, she saw that Jin Wan had already taken the seat across from him. Although she wanted to scold them and chase them away, Mo Jingshan was sitting right here. She had to maintain her image and could only endure. She put on an aggrieved expression and sat diagonally across from Mo Jingshan. There's no soup in today's set meal. Do you guys want to drink water? Bai Wei asked. All right, then go buy a few bottles of mineral water. CEO Mo spoke so much earlier. I'm sure he hasn't drunk any water yet, right? Ling Feifei opened her mouth. After speaking for so long, she only had Bai Wei buy it. She remained seated. Bai Wei narrowed her eyes at her. The canteen supermarket is just 10 meters behind you. I'll have to walk much further than you to go around such a long table. You only need to turn back and walk a few steps to buy it. Are you sure you want me to go? In any case, didn't Ling Feifei wish to pretend in front of CEO Mo? She could continue acting. She could not find an opportunity to order others around. Bai Wei would not spoil her. Ling Feifei turned back to glance in the direction of the supermarket. Jean Wan, you go. I'm not thirsty. If you want to drink, go buy it yourself. Jean Wan used her chopsticks to pick out the bones of a piece of fish. She patiently picked through it while calmly speaking without raising her eyelids. Ling Feifei immediately rolled her eyes at her. She placed down her chopsticks and stood up to head to the supermarket. CEO Mo, we weren't too rude earlier in the stadium, were we? Seeing that the noisy Ling Feifei had left, Bai Wei politely asked. Mo Jingshan glanced at the fish bone Jean Wan was picking out and saw that she had also picked out a very small, thin, and hard-to-find bone. After making sure that she would not be stuck in her throat, he looked away and said indifferently, no. Jean Wan was stunned. The silence did not last more than 3 minutes before Ling Feifei returned with water. She had only bought 2 bottles. Clearly, one for her and one for Mo Jingshan. When she sat down, she placed a bottle of water in front of him. She smiled sweetly and said, CEO Mo, please have some water. At this moment, the fish Jean Wan had just eaten was slightly salty. She immediately coughed. Mo Jingshan expressionlessly pushed the bottle of mineral water that had not been placed down for more than 5 seconds in front of Jean Wan. His thin lips only spat out 2 words, you drink. Dash. Chapter 244. Jean Wan's throat was indeed salty. She instinctively picked up the bottle, twisted it open, and drank a mouthful. Ling Feifei's expression immediately became longer. CEO Mo, I bought this water for you. Earlier, my roommate said that she wasn't thirsty. There's no need for her to drink your water. Earlier was earlier. Now is now. Can't you see that Jean Wan has been salted? Speaking of which, the fish is indeed a little salty today. Bai Wei glanced at Ling Feifei as she spoke. Also, don't always call me your roommate. Do Jean Wan and I not have names? I was afraid that CEO Mo wouldn't be able to remember so many names in such a short amount of time, so I didn't say anything. Ling Feifei carelessly explained as she glanced at Jean Wan in dissatisfaction. Seeing that Jean Wan had no qualms about drinking the water, she became even more unhappy. Thank you, CEO Mo, for the water. After Jean Wan finished drinking, she placed the bottle down and raised her eyes to speak to Mo Jingshan. She then smiled as though there was no one else present. To others, this smile of hers was purely a smile of thanks. However, from Mo Jingshan's perspective, this little woman was intentionally watching him make a scene, and now, she was clearly seducing him. No need to thank me. He also smiled slightly. His gaze was deep, appearing calm and indifferent. Seeing that Jean Wan and Mo Jingshan could speak to each other over a bottle of water, Ling Feifei felt even more upset. She suddenly regretted dragging Bai Wei and Jean Wan along to look for Mo Jingshan. Otherwise, the 2 of them would most likely never have the chance to sit and eat with someone like Mo Jingshan in this lifetime. Furthermore, earlier on, she was the one who suggested to have a meal together. Right now, CEO Mo had only come to a place like the cafeteria to give her face. If not for her, would Jean Wan and Bai Wei have such an opportunity? However, although she was unhappy, Mo Jingshan was seated diagonally across from her. Ling Feifei controlled herself and did not continue dwelling on this problem. She only said, CEO Mo, why don't I go buy another bottle for you? No need. Mo Jingshan also picked up the fish bones on his plate, calmly replying. His gaze was very light. T University's cafeteria would always be bustling with noise during lunch break. But today, because of Mo Jingshan's presence, many of the students did not speak loudly or play around. After eating, they quietly filed out. It was rare for them to be so quiet. Ling Feifei had barely eaten anything. She truly felt that the food in the canteen was not very tasty. However, when she saw that Imo Jingshan didn't seem to dislike her at all, and his table manners were calm and elegant. Such a lofty man actually had such a mundane side to him. The more she looked at him, the more charming he became. After taking a few bites, Ling Feifei could not help but mutter, "President Mo, don't blame me for being talkative, but you're really so handsome." After that, she continued to ask in a low voice, "CEO Mo, are you married?" Ahem. Jean Wan suddenly coughed. He coughed as if he was choking. He turned to the ground and coughed a few times, then picked up the bottle of mineral water again. Mo Jingshan glanced at her. Jean Wan avoided his eyes, held back her cough, and drank several mouthfuls of water. Ling Feifei was extremely displeased with Jean Wan's despicable actions of intentionally diverting Mo Jingshan's attention. "Jean Wan, why are you coughing out of the blue? Can't you see that he's talking? The fish is too salty." Jean Wan placed it in the water. "You're still eating salty fish? It's salted fish. If it's not salty, how can it be called salted fish?" Bai Wei said. Ling Feifei decided to ignore them. Her gaze stubbornly turned to Mo Jingshan. "CEO Mo, is it convenient for me to answer my earlier question?" Mo Jingshan's gaze was calm, gentle, and unhurried. "I'm married." Ling Feifei's anxious and expectant expression immediately collapsed. First, she did not expect him to actually be married. Secondly, she did not expect him to answer so directly. It's such a pity that CEO Mo actually got married so early. What's there to pity about marriage? Mo Jingshan coldly glanced at her, his tone clear. "I'm very fortunate to be able to marry my current wife. After having her, my once unchanging life has changed because of her. In my eyes, she is the most important person. Once a person walks through the world, they must have a pair of hands that will never leave. Only then will they not truly be alone." Jean Wan's eating movements gradually slowed down. She raised her eyes to look at the man sitting opposite her, only to see that his eyes were filled with a hint of warmth that she often saw. She actually did not know that when Mo Jingshan mentioned her in front of outsiders, he would actually be like this. "It seems like CEO Mo really loves your wife. I'm so envious." Ling Feifei forced a smile. All of a sudden, she really wanted to know what kind of woman a man like Mo Jingshan would treat so attentively was like. Hearing the word "really loves," Jean Wan's grip on her chopsticks tightened. In an instant, her heart seemed to be filled with boiling emotions. If she had not maintained her composure, she would have directly pounced into this man's embrace. Unfortunately, at this moment, a male student from Professor Lin's class walked into the cafeteria and bought a bottle of water. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly spotted Jean Wan and smiled at her, revealing his white teeth. "Jean Wan, I was wondering why I couldn't find you anywhere. Why did you suddenly run to the cafeteria to eat?" After all, Jean Wan had good looks and was usually quiet and low-key. Many of the hedonistic young masters in Professor Lin's class had good impressions of Jean Wan. When they walked past each other in T University, those cold and arrogant fellows would always greet Jean Wan amiably. Today was not an exception. However, from Mo Jingshan's perspective, that was not the case. Jean Wan smiled and turned back to greet him. When she turned back, she met the man's mild gaze. Several minutes later, Jean Wan rose to head to the restroom. T University's cafeteria's restroom was very clean and quiet. Every half an hour, a cleaning lady would come to clean it. Although there were many students entering and leaving, it was still very clean. At this moment, many students had already left the cafeteria. Jean Wan walked into the female restroom and turned on the tap to let out the water. She leisurely rubbed her hands. After washing up, she had just turned off the water when a white figure suddenly flashed in. She turned back and saw Mo Jingshan. "This is the female." Jean Wan was about to speak when she saw him close the restroom door. Jean Wan's hands were still wet. She was startled for a moment before hurriedly placing her hands under the air dryer to dry them. As the wind whistled, the man's long lashes lowered. He looked at her and took 2 steps forward. What happened to the man earlier? Chapter 245. This was the female restroom. Taking advantage of the fact that there was no one outside, he actually came in as he pleased and kissed her as he pleased. However, it was undeniable that no matter how cold and aloof Mo Jingshan appeared in front of outsiders, when he lost control of his emotions, only she could see it. Thinking of this, Jean Wan's heart was filled with happiness. After being kissed and bitten, Jean Wan was still smiling. The man pinched her chin. You're still quite happy? Jean Wan feigned ignorance. What? The man's emotions were unreadable as he watched her calm expression. As expected, I shouldn't have let you come to T University from the start. This really wasn't a wise choice. Don't misunderstand. He's just a classmate. Normally, we'll see each other all the time. When we see each other, we should at least greet each other. Is that so? Why didn't he greet your other 2 classmates? Perhaps, I'm better looking. Jean Wan spoke the truth. In any case, she could not lie in front of Mo Jingshan. Any lies would be useless in front of him. It was rare for the little woman to be so narcissistic. Mo Jingshan coldly scolded, very proud of yourself? How am I proud of myself? Earlier on, I was almost moved by you. I had to force myself not to speak. Right now, can't you feel my excitement and my expression that's as warm as a spring breeze? Jean Wan leaned into his embrace. Since the restroom door was already closed, she should act coquettishly when it was time to act coquettishly. Otherwise, if Boss Missouri turned into a jealous king or something, things would not end well. The little woman's soft and fragrant body was pressed into his embrace. The man glanced at her with a hint of a smile. Is that so? Then can you feel my killing intent? All of a sudden, there was a knock on the restroom door. Jean Wan's expression turned solemn. She turned toward the door and saw that it had been locked from the inside. Why can't this door be opened? A female student spoke from outside. Perhaps it's broken again? Last week, the cafeteria restroom's lock seemed to have been broken. The school said that they had already found someone to fix it. Perhaps it's broken again? Forget it. Let's go to the school's restroom. The 2 female students pushed against the door but could not open it. In the end, they left. Jean Wan had just released a sigh of relief when the hand behind her waist suddenly lifted her up. Before she could react, the man abruptly kissed her again. The long and deep kiss made her soften instantly. He pressed the back of her head with one hand and held her slender waist with the other, bringing her forward. This kind of occasion, this kind of place, everything about this man made her want to hold him tightly in her world, not to be taken away by anyone, not to be shared with anyone. She instinctively stuck out her tongue to make a tentative response. The man paused, his eyes darkened inch by inch, and he mercilessly bit the tip of her tongue. The sweetness was stronger than the pain. Jean Wan raised her hands to hug the man's neck. In an instant, she was lifted up by him, placed on the sink, and kissed. When her breathing quickened, he saw the little woman's flushed neck and ears in the mirror behind her. Mo Jingshan's hands were placed on the edge of the sink, encircling her between him and the mirror. He bent down to look at her, his black eyes filled with undisguised aggression. There's still more than a month before you graduate. It seems like I can't leave T-City in the short term, he said slowly and huskily. Keep those people who are seeking death away from you, N. When Jean Wan was carried up, her clothes were slightly messy. The little woman was not dressed in the mature professional attire she wore in High City studio. Jean Wan was only 21 years old. Her eyes were big and her skin was white. This simple and clean student attire made her appear like a high school student who had yet to reach adulthood. Right now, she was sitting in front of him. Her gaze was clean and innocent. Her slightly messy collar was slightly pulled open, revealing her collarbone. The softness hidden under her clothes rose and fell with her breathing. In an instant, he kissed her, and her red, translucent lips were exceptionally seductive. Seeing her like this, Mo Jingshan's lower body began to heat up. His Adam's apple bobbed, and he suppressed the desire to press her down here and do it properly. He calmed his breathing and slowly asked, "Must we maintain such a distance and relationship in T University?" "It's not necessary. It doesn't have to be like this. But as you can see, the students here all worship you. There are many girls like Ling Feifei. I still have to study here for more than a month. I don't want to be disturbed by them. In the past, I was always targeted by those rich young ladies in high city. It's not easy for me to live such a low-key and peaceful life. Anyway, I don't have much time left. Just cooperate with me." Jean Wan raised her arms and hugged the man's neck tightly. "You have to know how much weight the words Mo Jingshan's wife carry. I'll instantly become the target of public criticism. With me around, will you be afraid?" "Of course I won't be afraid. But I've seen too many envious, jealous, and hateful gazes since I was young. Right now, I'll just treat it as Mrs. Mo visiting T University incognito. Mr. Mo, you have to give me some face and let me play to my heart's content." Jean Wan leaned in and kissed his lips. When the man lowered his eyes to look at her, she said with some pride, "You can't always spend your time on me in T City. There's still a Mo Corporation subsidiary company here. If there's a need, the company's management needs you to meet them. Furthermore, don't you think that if we directly publicize our relationship, it'll be too much to abuse the dogs?" Mo Jingshan snorted. "Your Professor Lin isn't hidden. Professor Lin doesn't matter. He's an old man with high IQ. He knows what to say and what not to say. As for the other school leaders and students, forget it. What's wrong with that roommate of yours?" Mo Jingshan carried Jean Wan down from the slightly wet and cold sink. Men usually did not pay much attention to the small squabbles between women. However, earlier on, Ling Feifei had been arguing with Jean Wan and the others. It was clear that their relationship did not seem like that of normal roommates. "She's the one who called to find trouble with me that night. She's only 20 years old, but she behaves like an immature child. She's likely been spoiled by her family. I don't usually bicker with her. You can just ignore her." "Does she always target you?" "Not really. It's just that she feels that I'm the manager of a small studio. She feels it's unfair that I'm living in the same dormitory as her, who's as beautiful as a flower, so she always wants to bully me." The man raised his brows. "It's rare to find someone who has the instinct to bully you." Jean Wan. Chapter 246. The man watched her for a moment before leaning down to press his lips against hers. He used a hoarse and alluring voice to say, "Only I can bully you." Jean Wan, what kind of big truth was he spouting? If she was bullied, wasn't she bullied on the bed? Jean Wan's phone rang. Bai Wei was calling to rush her. "Why aren't you back yet after going to the bathroom for so long? Professor Lin's class is at 1. It's already 12:45. I'll be right there." Jean Wan hung up after speaking. Originally, she wanted to leave. However, being held in the man's embrace, Jean Wan raised her head to kiss his chin. "Hubby, you were especially handsome on stage today." Jean Wan smiled brightly. "You were different from your usual handsomeness. Today, in front of a group of young and energetic students, your entire body seemed to be glowing." Mo Jingshan had never heard Jean Wan describe him in such a straightforward manner. His gaze faltered slightly as he looked at her. "In this world, I'm afraid there isn't a man more suited to wear a shirt than you." Jean Wan kissed his chin again. "When you stood there and spoke, it really made one want to tear apart your shirt and pounce on you. The man's handsome brows rose slightly. His gaze was deep as he slowly said, "I'll give you this chance tonight." Jean Wan did have the intention to take the initiative to seduce him. Who asked him to praise his wife in front of others? He was so charming. However, the man's words caused her to immediately break down. Her face was burning as she escaped from his embrace and headed out to open the door. The moment she opened the door, she saw Ling Feifei, who had appeared out of nowhere, staring at Jean Wan with an unhappy expression. She seemed to want to peer into the bathroom behind Jean Wan. "Is CEO Mo here?" Ling Feifei's senses were sharp as she glared at her. Jean Wan walked out, slowly closing the bathroom door behind her. No. Ling Feifei stepped forward. "Earlier, I saw him head this way when he left. This isn't the cafeteria's exit. How could he not be here?" Jean Wan calmly replied, "Earlier, he seemed to have passed by here. However, he definitely had to leave after using the bathroom. Could it be that he's staying here to eat?" In the bathroom, Mo Jingshan, she thought that Feng Ling would be back after resting for a few days, but when Jean Wan called to ask, Feng Ling hoarsely said that she might need to rest for a few more days. Jean Wan was worried and directly went to Feng Ling's residence. After knocking for a long time, the door was finally opened. The moment she opened the door, Jean Wan's eyelids twitched. This was the first time she had seen Feng Ling look so haggard and out of sorts. She then noticed that her short hair was slightly messy and hesitated before entering. "What's wrong? Are your injuries any better? Are you sick again or?" "I'm fine. Why are you here?" Feng Ling turned around, avoiding Jean Wan's gaze. However, when Feng Ling turned around, Jean Wan saw that there seemed to be two particularly obvious red marks on Feng Ling's neck. Jean Wan immediately walked over and pulled Feng Ling back. Only then did she see the marks on her neck more clearly. Not only on her neck, but her collar was also slightly pulled open by Jean Wan. Around Feng Ling's collarbone, there were scattered marks. Jean Wan naturally recognized these marks. Every time Mo Jingshan lost control in bed and was especially forceful, she would wake up to find such marks on her body. However, Mo Jingshan usually cared about her feelings, so this was rare. Even if there were some marks, there wouldn't be too many. But Feng Ling's, it could be described as having suffered some kind of serious sexual assault. What happened? Jean Wan held her hand to prevent her from turning away. Seeing that Feng Ling's complexion was also very bad, she immediately pushed her to sit on the sofa and looked at her coldly and sternly. "Haven't you been recuperating at home these days?" Who was it? The answer clearly appeared in her mind, but Jean Wan felt that although Nan Heng's background was complicated, he was extremely calm and rational like Mo Jingshan. It shouldn't be possible for him. The answer was obvious in Jean Wan's eyes. Feng Ling looked into her eyes and did not speak or explain. It really was Nan Heng? Jean Wan raised her hand in disbelief to tug at Feng Ling's clothes, but Feng Ling gently pulled her away. "Don't look," she said hoarsely. "When did this happen? Yesterday? Last night? And it was during the day? What exactly did he want to do? He clearly knows that you're injured, yet he still treats you like this? Is he a beast?" Jean Wan was so angry that she almost cursed. She forced herself to control herself to avoid agitating Feng Ling, who appeared to be in a bad condition. Feng Ling did not answer. After a moment of silence, she said, "I asked for it. It was my words that agitated him. Otherwise, it wouldn't have come to this. I overestimated the way we interact. I can only blame myself. What exactly happened? Regardless of the relationship between the two of you, he can't treat you like this. What does this mean?" Jean Wan pointed at the marks on Feng Ling's neck that appeared to have been bitten. They were not simple hickeys. This is called abuse. Abuse, do you understand? This is too much. She saw that Feng Ling's complexion was really bad. Furthermore, it seemed like she had just been bullied not too long ago. The room seemed to still be filled with the faint smell of tobacco from before the man left. Jean Wan stood up to open the windows. She suddenly caught a glimpse of the bedroom door. She abruptly walked over and saw the mess on the floor. Feng Ling's clothes were torn and scattered. Almost none of her clothes were intact. They were all thrown on the floor. Jean Wan pursed her lips. She turned to see Feng Ling standing up from the sofa. She seemed to be pouring a glass of water for Jean Wan. She saw that Feng Ling's walking posture was slightly awkward. It was clear that she was in excruciating pain. "You don't need to pour water." "I won't drink," Jean Wan said calmly. Jean Wan calmly said, "Feng Ling, Mr. Mo and I are your real employers now. No matter what kind of relationship you had with Nan Heng or what kind of entanglement you had, I don't care. But you're my woman. I can't just watch as my woman is bullied like this." Feng Ling still poured the water and placed the glass down. She then stood by the sofa and raised her eyes to look at Jean Wan. It seemed like she wanted to say something, but her lips moved and she chose to close her mouth. "What do you want to say?" Jean Wan saw that Feng Ling's condition was really bad. Her intuition told her that she wanted her help. Feng Ling's lips moved again. After a long time, she forced out a few hoarse words. "Mrs. Mo, can I trouble you to buy a box of birth control pills for me? Dash." Chapter 247. This was the first time Jean Wan had bought a contraceptive pill. When she stood in the pharmacy, she didn't know what brand to buy. It wasn't until the pharmacy clerk brought her a pink box with only one pill in it that she took a closer look at it. Then her eyes glanced at the medicine counter next to her. "Miss, do you need anything else? Do you have a pregnancy test?" "Yes, please wait a moment. I'll get it for you." When Jean Wan left the pharmacy, she held the contraceptive pills she bought for Feng Ling in one hand and the pregnancy test paper she bought for herself in the other. Although she didn't seem to be pregnant previously, she occasionally showed signs of early pregnancy. However, due to her cold body, she didn't consider whether she would get pregnant soon. Cold body was related to the cold womb. Although it didn't have much effect, the pregnancy rate would definitely be lower. Therefore, Jean Wan didn't take the possibility of pregnancy seriously. Since she came to the pharmacy today, she bought a pregnancy test and went back to take it. Returning to Feng Ling's residence, Feng Ling had already showered and changed her clothes. Except for the obvious marks on her neck that couldn't be covered, she looked no different. "Do you want to move to my place these days?" Jean Wan handed the medicine to her. She originally wanted to go into the bedroom to help her put away the clothes on the floor, but when she entered, she saw that the floor and bed had been cleaned. Although Feng Ling was used to living with those men, she really liked cleanliness. Today was the first time she saw such a scene. "No, you and CEO Mo haven't been together for more than a month. You'd better enjoy your rare time alone." "I'm fine here. I'll go back to school to accompany you after a few days of rest." "I don't need to accompany you, but you can't stay here alone." "What if Nanheng, he just flew to America? He won't come for the time being." Feng Ling's expression was calm. Jean Wan slowly frowned. "Flew to America? He just bullied you like this, and in the blink of an eye, he'll fly back to America?" "Mrs. Mo, I don't want Mr. Mo to know about this matter. Otherwise, he might fire me because my matter has affected your mood. I don't plan to return to America, so." Feng Ling didn't explain but slightly pursed her lips. "Rest well. I won't tell him." Jean Wan didn't hesitate at all. Only then did Feng Ling stop talking. She smiled at her, but clearly, she was not in the mood to smile. It could be seen that there must be a story between Feng Ling and Nanheng, but Feng Ling did not like to share too much about herself with others. Previously, in the condo, Feng Ling was able to talk about some of her past experiences, which could be considered as letting down some of her guard against Jean Wan, this employer or friend whom she was increasingly familiar with. However, she clearly did not intend to talk too much about her relationship with Nanhang. Or perhaps, there was something that was too obscure to mention. Jean Wan stayed at Feng Ling's place until 7 in the evening before leaving. In the end, she helped Feng Ling apply ice to the bruises on her neck and reminded her to apply ice every hour. After confirming that Feng Ling's mood and condition were stable, she finally left. At night, when Mo Jingshan entered the house, Jean Wan had just returned home. When he returned, Jean Wan was sitting on the sofa with a pillow in her hand. She was curled up into a ball and covered her eyes with her fingers, leaving only a small gap to look at the television screen. The man approached, his hand landing on her head. The little woman on the sofa immediately shivered. She let out an "ah" and abruptly raised her head to look at him. The fear in her eyes gradually dissipated. "Why did you come back so late? What are you watching?" Mo Jingshan rubbed the top of her head comfortingly, glancing at the television screen from the side. The television was currently showing a horror film that had recently been released. "When I reached home earlier, I realized that you weren't back yet. Recently, I've gotten used to staying in the dormitory. When I was bored, I randomly watched a movie. It just so happened that they were showing a horror film, so I watched it for a while." "With that little bit of courage of yours, when did you become interested in horror films?" "In the past, I always heard others say that it was good, but I never had the chance to watch it. Just now, when the channel changed, I saw it, so I took a few more glances." Jean Wan was still hugging the pillow, her face pressed against it. She tilted her head to look at him. "You're indeed busier in T-City than in High City. I'll be staying in T-City for at least half a month. I'll try to finish my work in the morning and come back earlier to accompany you at night, N?" Seeing that the little woman seemed to have been badly frightened, Mo Jingshan picked up the remote control to turn off the television. He then carried her up, sat on the sofa, and placed her on his lap. "If you're not coming back, it's fine if I stay in the dormitory. After all, I've already stayed there for more than a month. I'm already used to it. Your roommate has a very serious brain problem and psychological disorder. It's best if you don't stay there as often." Jean Wan almost laughed out loud. A very serious brain problem and psychological disorder? Was he indirectly implying that Ling Feifei was a retard? Her eyes curved. "Humans, will always encounter all kinds of weirdos. This kind of person with a low IQ doesn't pose any threat to me at all. What's there to worry about? It's true that she doesn't pose any threat, but it'll easily lower her IQ." After speaking, Mo Jingshan watched her for a moment before pinching her cheek. "I'll accompany you in T-City for a few more days. After that, when I return to High City, I'll be busy with some overseas cooperation projects. I might have to travel frequently." Jean Wan raised her face, blinking. "Have you gotten any new female secretaries by your side recently?" The man pursed his lips. "What, are you afraid that an unknown love rival will appear when I'm not by your side?" The room was warm. Jean Wan wore soft home clothes. Her hair was tied into a bun, and her sleeves were rolled up, revealing her fair wrists. She did not wear any unnecessary jewelry. She pursed her lips, hugging the man's neck and pulling him down, forcing him to lower his head to press closer to her. She leaned close to his ear to say, "You're the only one who's dissatisfied with the male students who greet me in school, but I'm not allowed to investigate the enemies around you?" In the past, Jean Wan did not mind the gender of the employees in Mo Jingshan's company or around him. However, ever since the incident with Shuyan, she had always minded the position of his secretary. The man's hand was around her waist. Using this position, he leaned down and kissed her twice on the lips. He chuckled softly. "My secretary position is still empty. Mrs. Mo is really worried. Why don't you wait until you've completed your studies in business management, hand over the studio to your best friend, and you can come to work in Mo Corporation?" Then Xia Tian will most likely use the reason of valuing love over friendship to cut ties with me for a few days. Chapter 248. After a while, when Jin Wan was about to leave his embrace, the man's low and indifferent voice suddenly rang from above her head. What's that? Jin Wan raised her eyes to meet Mo Jingshan's gaze. She then turned to look at the trash can by the sofa. There was a pink package of pregnancy test paper. It was a very small thing. Earlier, when she threw it away, she had deliberately hidden it. Alas, he still saw it. Previously, my appetite wasn't good. I was always nauseous and dizzy. Later, my appetite suddenly improved. I can eat and sleep well. Today, when I passed by the pharmacy, I bought a pregnancy test paper to see if I'm pregnant. After the test, I found that I'm not. It should be because I'm not used to the climate in T-City. Jin Wan leaned into the man's embrace. It seems like grandfather's dream of holding a great-grandchild will have to wait. Mo Jingshan glanced at her expression and casually took out the pregnancy test paper from the trash can. He lowered his head to read the instructions and related information on it. After reading it, he directly carried Jin Wan up from the sofa. What are you doing? Jin Wan was suddenly placed on the ground. Her legs landed on the ground, and she stood steadily. Go to the hospital for a check, he said. The accuracy of this test at home is only 50 to 90%. It's better to go to the hospital for a check to be sure. There's no need. I haven't been that sleepy these days, and I don't feel much nausea. I don't think I'm pregnant. Besides, it's already so late. The hospital only has emergency rooms. The gynecologists and obstetricians aren't around. Even if we go, there won't be a detailed examination. It's already so late, and even the blood test doctor isn't around. Mo Jingshan did not plan to be careless with Jin Wan's pregnancy. She could tell. She smiled and stood on her tiptoes before him. She held the man's handsome face and kissed him heavily. I'll definitely take good care of my body. The moment there are any signs of pregnancy, I'll obediently go to the hospital. Mo Jingshan glanced at the pregnancy test paper again. Jin Wan decided to show him the test result with only a red line that she had taken with her phone. In the end, Mo Jingshan glanced at the time and did not say anything more. He turned into the kitchen to help her boil brown sugar water. After Jin Wan came to T-City, without Auntie Chen's supervision, it had been a long time since she drank hot water or brown sugar water at night. Seeing that Mo Jingshan was in the kitchen, Jin Wan tidied up the paper basket and turned on the television to find something good to watch. Horror movies were better left alone. After changing a few channels, his phone rang. She took a look. The caller was the secretary-manager of the G Corporation, the most capable secretary of her father, Ji Hongwen. After Jin Wan came to T-City, she hadn't contacted her family much, and her father hadn't called for a long time. Why would his secretary suddenly call? She picked it up. Hello. After a few seconds of silence, a familiar voice came from the other side of the phone. It was polite and formal. Hello, Miss G. I'm Secretary Zhou. The other party continued. Director G recently made an appointment with a few old friends to go to T-City for sightseeing. Since Miss G is in T-City, he asked me to arrange a time to meet you. Director G hasn't seen you in a while. May I know when Miss G will be free next week? My dad is coming to T-City. Why didn't he call me personally? Jin Wan spoke unhurriedly. I've never heard of him being close to any of his old friends in T-City before. Now that he's here in T-City for sightseeing in this season. What's so interesting about the cold wind and fallen leaves on the ground? Director G just went to a meeting. Before the meeting, he made this decision with several partners and friends, and then asked me to arrange everything in T-City as soon as possible. I called Miss G as soon as possible. After all, Director G agreed to go to T-City because you're there. This father misses his daughter but is unwilling to say it out loud, so I can only try my best to make the arrangements. Secretary Zhou smiled warmly and said, Chairman Ji has also discussed a few new collaborations in T-City and invited a few old friends from nearby. Secretary Zhou had worked for Ji Hongwen for many years. This year, he was about 34 or 35 years old. He had always been capable and could be regarded as one of her father's capable assistants. However, Secretary Zhou didn't have much contact with Jean Wan and only nodded at her face when they met a few times. However, he did know that Secretary Zhou had worked for the Ji Corporation for many years. All right, I understand. Thank you, Secretary Zhou. I'll tell you the specific time after I decide. After hanging up the phone, Jean Wan sat on the sofa and stared at the ground in a daze. She didn't know if her father finally dealt with the incident with Shenharu. She understood him, so she didn't rush him. However, Shenharu's existence was definitely a considerable threat to the Ji family. Now that her father suddenly wanted to come to T-City, perhaps she could take the opportunity to have a good talk with him. Several minutes later, Jean Wan's phone beeped with a text message. She subconsciously turned to look at it. It was from Secretary Zhou's number. There was only a simple sentence: next Wednesday, CEO G will be at T-City's exclusive U Club. If Miss G has enough time, you can go there at that time. Jean Wan glanced at it and replied, all right. She was about to call Ji Hongwen and ask him when he would come to T-City. She could pick him up at the airport in advance. However, Secretary Zhou said that Director Ji had just left for a meeting, and her father was usually very busy in the company. Jean Wan was thinking about it when Imo Jingshan brought out the brown sugar water he had prepared for her. Test the temperature. Drink it when it's not hot. Imo Jingshan placed the glass in front of her eyes. Jean Wan picked it up and took a sip. Imo Jingshan had most likely placed it by the window to dry for her. It was no longer particularly hot. She drank some and was about to put it down when the man glanced at her. Drink it all. Jean Wan could only raise the glass and finish it in one gulp. This brown sugar water had some ginger in it. After drinking it, Jean Wan went to take a shower. It had already been an hour, but she could still feel the warmth in her stomach. She was about to close the window before going to bed when the man reached out and pulled her back. He carried her back to the bed. In the future, don't let the wind blow in before going to bed. I'll close it. Every time Imo Jingshan was by her side, he took good care of her. When he laid down, Jean Wan leaned against his chest. She played with the man's hand as she said, your brown sugar water skills are even better than Auntie Chen's. Even if you're only self-sufficient during your time in America, you can't possibly know how to do this. You didn't specially learn it, did you? Chapter 249. The bedside lamp fell. The light was dim, but Jean Wan could still see the man's face clearly. She played with his palm, her fingers poking around in his palm. This is the first time I've heard you talk about your mother. What kind of person is she? To be able to live with Director Mo for a lifetime and obtain grandfather's love, she must be a woman with a high EQ, right? Mo Jingshan raised his brows, holding back a smile. Aren't you the one grandfather likes the most? That time, I heard grandfather talk about your mother. From his tone, he seemed to admire and like her a lot. I've never interacted with her before. Earlier, I heard you say that she likes to study health, so I asked out of curiosity. Jean Wan placed her fingers between his. Their palms were pressed together, and their fingers intertwined. She raised her eyes to look at him. The man's expression was calm. Without hesitation, he said, she is indeed a good mother, but I've been away from America for too long, and the time I spent by her side was short. After I grew up, I didn't interact much with her. Then, will she like me? Yes. Mo Jingshan rubbed her hair. My mother's personality is very open-minded. If she wasn't, she wouldn't have tolerated my father for so many years. As Mo Jingshan spoke, he covered the two of them with the blanket. How much I care about you is how much she likes you. Don't think too much. Go to sleep. Jean Wan raised her chin, asking proudly, you care about me a lot? I care. The smile on Jean Wan's lips deepened. She leaned closer into his embrace. Under the bedside lamp, her eyes were clear. Then what do you like the most about me? Mo Jingshan's hand paused on her hand. He looked at her fair and clean face. His hand brushed past it, causing a strand of her hair to flutter. Thinking of ways to make me praise you. Aren't you embarrassed in the middle of the night? Mo Jingshan chuckled, kissing her on the lips. Are you still not satisfied after tasting the sweetness I gave you in front of your roommates that day? Jean Wan immediately arched into his embrace. I've never heard you praise me before. Can't I hear you now? He looked at her coquettishly, rubbing against his chest as she spoke, and leaned down to kiss her. Maybe I'm destined to fall in your hands in this life. My heart softens when I see you coquettishly. Oh, then it seemed like she really should act coquettishly in the future. If it weren't for the fact that absence made the heart grow fonder, and if it weren't for the fact that they had just gotten back together, she wouldn't act coquettishly like this. In the end, he touched her face and smiled faintly. Probably because I want to kiss you whenever I see you, no matter when or where. Jean Wan glared at him. Haven't you kissed enough? Yes, quite a lot, but not enough. The man said and kissed her lips again. Jean Wan returned the kiss, panting heavily before she hurriedly called for a stop. I really have a test tomorrow, and I can't easily stop this kind of test. I need to conserve my energy. Let me sleep early. All right. Jean Wan had been leaning against his chest since she fell asleep. She was quiet and warm. Mo Jingshan looked at the little woman in his arms. His fingers caressed her hair and landed on her ears, gently caressing them. What did he like about her? Back then, Qin Sighting had said that the moment he saw Shi Niange, he knew that he would most likely be entangled with this woman until death. Mo Jingshan's feelings for Jean Wan were most likely not as simple as until death. Ever since that night many years ago, when he was dragged ashore by this teenage girl on the Los Angeles River, and when this young girl performed CPR on him in the dark, he was destined to be entangled with her for the rest of his life. At that time, when he was unconscious, he heard her softly muttering while performing CPR, "Don't die, ah. This is the first time I've done something good in my life, and also the first time I've performed CPR. Look, I've even given you my first kiss. Please don't die, come back to life." At that time, he really could not open his mouth to speak. Otherwise, he would have definitely told her, "Little friend, CPR is not as simple as blowing air inwards, and a first kiss is not as simple as this." 3 days later, T University. The results of the test were out. As expected, hard work pays off. Jean Wan's results were first in Professor Lin's class. Ever since she was young, she had always obtained straight A's in every subject. Even though she was not very serious when she was studying in America, she was still blessed by the heavens when it came to absorbing knowledge. As long as she put in a little more effort, she would be able to memorize better than others and comprehend more thoroughly. Thus, things like tests usually did not pose a problem for her. Just as she was about to head to the school building, Ling Feifei suddenly called out to her from behind. "Jean Wan, you haven't returned to the dormitory for the past few days. Don't tell me you have a man outside of school?" Jean Wan did not even turn back. She calmly replied, "We're not underage children. Don't bother about whether I have a man or not. Even if I do, how is it bothering you?" Ling Feifei rolled her eyes. "Don't think I can't tell. The last time CEO Mo was around, you kept trying to find an opportunity to speak to him. Later on, in the restroom, you must have found an opportunity to meet CEO Mo alone. Do you think that just because you're from High City, you can really speak to him? Why don't you take a good look at yourself in the mirror? Do you think you're worthy of him? In this world, it's not easy for the mentally handicapped to survive. You haven't even clearly seen your own nature, yet you've already handed a mirror to someone else. Are you afraid that your own face is too ugly and will scare yourself, or are you only capable of seeing others? Have you already reached a state of madness where you forget yourself? Ling Feifei, this is an illness. You have to be treated. Jean Wan chuckled. She ignored Ling Feifei's choked expression and entered the school building unconcernedly. Ling Feifei stood in the same spot, angrily glaring at Jean Wan's back. It was as though she could not wait to use her gaze to pierce a hole through Jean Wan's body. She then picked up her phone to look at the message she had just received. Feifei, this morning, I saw the Jean Wan who used to stay in your dormitory. She actually alighted from CEO Mo's car. You're roommates, you definitely know the inside story. Hurry and tell me, could it be that Jean Wan has hugged onto CEO Mo's thigh? Ling Feifei once again read the message word by word. Finally, she raised her eyes to look at Jean Wan's direction, but she had already entered. Jean Wan had always maintained her composure. She had always kept everything under wraps and never revealed too much about herself. Could it be that she had secretly taken advantage of her? CEO Mo had already said that he was married. If Jean Wan was bold enough to interfere in someone else's marriage and seduce Mo Jingxian, then she, Ling Feifei, could not blame her for catching hold of her weakness. Chapter 250. Wednesday. Jean Wan got out of the taxi and walked to the door of the luxurious Premium U clubhouse. Before she came, she called Ji Hongwen, but he didn't answer. Then she called Secretary Zhou, who said that Chairman Ji's cell phone was in his coat pocket and he was playing cards and drinking with several old friends. When Jean Wan arrived, she saw that the location of the clubhouse was quite good. Although her father was not a particularly low-key person, he usually chose relatively quiet theme clubhouses or antique restaurants that looked very grand. This was the first time he chose such a young place. However, there were too many rich people here, and this was one of the largest clubhouses in T-City. If her father wanted to come here to talk about cooperation or to meet old friends, he had no better place to go, so he chose this place. It was not impossible. When Jean Wan arrived, it was already past 7:00 in the evening. The clubhouse was not completely lively, and only a few people were walking in. Seeing the waiter standing inside, she was about to ask where room 18 was, but before she could ask, a hand suddenly reached out and held her arm. She turned her eyes sharply, only to see that it was a man in his 30s, dressed in a professional suit. Are you Miss Ji? Jean Wan looked at him warily. You are? The man smiled politely. I was sent by Chairman Ji to pick you up. Chairman Ji is waiting for you in the private room. Just follow me. From the beginning, the person who contacted Jean Wan was not her father. Even if Secretary Zhou was trustworthy, he was not as trustworthy as her father. Now the person who came to pick her up was a stranger. Jean Wan raised her eyebrows. Are you sent by Chairman Ji? Did he bring a new assistant to T-City or something? Where is Secretary Zhou? Her father was not such an unreliable person. Jean Wan became more and more vigilant. The man smiled politely and said in a calm tone, Chairman Ji drank too much. Secretary Zhou is watching him in the private room. I'm Chairman Ji's new assistant. Miss Ji, even if you don't believe me, you should trust Secretary Zhou. She has been in the Ji Corporation for so many years. You can't not trust her. Besides, it's the first time I've met you, and I have no motive to hurt you. Are you worried? Jean Wan didn't speak and looked at the bathroom not far away. Okay, I came here in a hurry. Can I go to the bathroom to put on lipstick? Do you need to touch up your makeup to see your father? Of course. My father's old friend is here, isn't he? It's the most basic etiquette to touch up your makeup. The man nodded to her. Okay. Of course. Jin-won walked quickly into the bathroom with her cell phone in hand and called Mo Jingshan as soon as she entered. The call was quickly picked up. She knew that he was having a meeting at the subsidiary company. Last night, he had said that he had to make a last-minute decision on a project at the subsidiary company tonight. Jin-won rarely called him when she knew he was in a meeting, so Mo Jingshan picked up the phone. "What's up?" The man's low voice came from the phone. Jin-won didn't want the man outside to hear, so she lowered her voice. "I'm in the exclusive U Club. My father's secretary asked me to come here, but I haven't seen my father yet. For now, I'm not sure if there's anything else, but if I don't pick up when you call me 20 minutes later, then there's really something wrong." Before Mo Jingshan could speak again, the man outside had come to the door of the bathroom. Jin-won suddenly put down the phone, hung up the phone, took out a lipstick and casually applied it. She turned to the man waiting outside the door and said, "Let's go. Please lead the way." They took the elevator to the floor of private room 18. The man took her to the innermost private room. When they reached the door, he opened the door and motioned for Jin-won to go in. Although it looked like a private room, there was no sound inside. Jin-won stood at the door and didn't go in. "Isn't my father drinking with a few friends? Is Secretary Zhou also inside? Why is there no sound? Chairman Ji is in the next private room. He misses you, Miss Ji, but he knows you don't like this kind of drinking and social occasions. If you go there, you will inevitably be persuaded to drink a few glasses of wine, so he asked you to wait for him here. Miss Ji, don't worry. I'll ask Secretary Zhou when Chairman Ji can come." Jin-won felt it was very interesting. Although Secretary Zhou had worked for the Ji Corporation for many years, it seemed that he was not very reliable. She took a step back and moved away from the door. She could hear someone singing next door and the sound of glasses clinking against each other. "It's fine. My dad has never allowed me to drink since I was young. Many people know that, so it's fine even if I go in." The man hesitated and said, "All right." He turned to go next door, opened the door, and said, "Miss Ji, please." Jin-won walked in, but as soon as she entered the door, she saw that there was no one inside at all. There was only a large color screen TV dozens of inches on the wall, showing a cocktail party and karaoke. She turned around abruptly, but the door behind her had closed with a bang. She picked up her cell phone and looked at it. Sure enough, there was no signal in the private room. Whether it was the room next door or this room, the other party knew her too well and specially designed it for her. She was alone in this private room. The lights were bright, the coffee table and sofa were clean, and there was not a bottle of wine. But there was only a cup of steaming tea in the middle of the coffee table, which meant that the person who had been sitting here had just left. Jin-won didn't reach out to touch it. She looked around again, turned to the window, and looked out. Although this floor was not particularly high, there was no help outside, so there was no way to get out of here. Secretary Zhou had been with her father for so many years, and he would not easily be swayed. Who on earth had the ability to bribe Secretary Zhou? Suddenly, sleepiness came over her. Jin-won couldn't help yawning, and her head became heavier and heavier. Because she didn't sit down, she immediately shook her head hard because of the weightlessness and woke up from her sleepiness. But her brain was a little muddled. She subconsciously took out her cell phone and looked at the time. She had only been here for 5 minutes, and this happened. Sure enough, there was something wrong. Jin-won turned to open the window, but before she got halfway, her body softened and she fell on the sofa. She touched her forehead, and a wave of dizziness came over her. Her head was heavy, and her vision was a little blurred. Jin-won clenched her hands, digging her nails deep into her palms to keep herself awake. After experiencing so much, how could she not know this situation? Chapter 251. She was so dizzy that she tried to stand up several times but still fell onto the sofa. She struggled for a while and gave up. She pressed her eyebrows with one hand and picked up her cell phone to check the time with the other. She thought about it in a daze. Mo Jingshan must have heard what she said on the phone earlier, right? Her voice was very low, and he was in a meeting. Maybe he didn't hear it clearly. Jean Wan bit her lip and kept awake. She didn't know how long it had been. 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 10 minutes. Just as Jean Wan's consciousness was getting more and more muddled, suddenly, there was a loud bang from the door of the private room, which woke her up. Jean Wan raised her eyes and saw Mo Jingshan coming in. The man looked stern. When he saw Jean Wan lying on the sofa, his cold eyes swept around the private room and finally stopped on the teacup on the coffee table. The moment Jean Wan saw Mo Jingshan's face, she released a sigh of relief. Feeling the man's approach, it was a familiar and reassuring scent. Her muddled mind instantly cleared up. The man's hand touched her face. After confirming that she was fine, he saw that she was slightly dazed and immediately stood up. Just a few minutes later, the people outside the private room whom Jean Wan had never seen before all fell down in front of the door. Jean Wan turned to see that Mo Jingshan had opened the window of the private room to let in the wind from outside. She breathed the fresh air outside the window and felt much better. She supported herself to sit up and suddenly heard a text message on her cell phone. Sure enough, there was signal coming in when the door and window were opened. But the text message said that Mo Jingshan had called her 1 minute ago, 2 minutes ago, 3 minutes ago. In this short period of 10 minutes, Mo Jingshan's phone calls did not stop. Jean Wan sobered up, saw the people outside the door, and heard Mo Jingshan's cold voice methodically. I'm not interested in who the person in charge of your club is, but I don't think your boss wants me to know who he is. Then the people who followed Mo Jingshan went to the bathroom on this floor to find a few rags and stuffed the mouths of the people on the ground. At this time, Jean Wan's cell phone rang again. When she picked it up, Ji Hongwen's voice was serious as usual. Nwan, did you call me before? From his tone, it was obvious that he didn't know what had happened in T-City. Dad, are you in High City or T-City? Jean Wan asked. How did you know I was in T-City? Recently, the company has a business partner from T-City. I came over to take a look, but I was in a hurry and didn't have time to visit you. Who told you about this? Where are you now? I'm at the hotel arranged by my business partner. I can't find the time right now. My business partner's car is already waiting downstairs. If I can squeeze out some time before returning to High City, I'll go to T University to see you. Dad, you go ahead with your work. I'm fine. Are you sure? Girl, you rarely call me. My phone was in my pocket and I didn't notice when I pressed the mute button. That's why I saw the missed call. Yes, I'm fine. After speaking, without waiting for Ji Hongwen to ask again, Jean Wan quickly hung up to prevent him from worrying. The reason why she believed Secretary Zhou's words was that she had texted Ji Hongwen's assistant when she was chatting with Xia Tian over the weekend. She had asked the assistant about Ji Hongwen's recent schedule, and the assistant had confirmed that he indeed had a schedule in T-City. She didn't expect that the person behind the scenes knew everything about the Ji family better than she did and knew who Jean Wan often interacted with and trusted. The Ji Corporation's network had always been simple, and Secretary Zhou's actions had always been reassuring. She suddenly felt a chill on her head. Stimulated by the chill, Jean Wan instantly sobered up. She raised her head to see the man who was putting a towel wrapped in an ice pack on her head. She subconsciously raised her hand to hold the towel on her head. She had been sitting on the sofa since she received the call and didn't have the strength to get up. She didn't notice when the people who had been restrained in front of the door were taken out. She just looked at the handsome and cold face of the man in front of her. Are you better? Mo Jingshan moved his hand away from her head and watched her compress her head with an ice pack and a towel. Jean Wan nodded. Fortunately, I called you in advance. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened. At this time, there was a noise outside the door. It seemed that the person in charge of the club was called out by Mo Jingshan's men. Mo Jingshan looked at her for a while and touched her head. It's all right. Leave when you're sober. We'll talk about it when we get back. Jean Wan responded with an N. Right now, although she did not have much strength in her body, the fresh air in the private room and the chill on her head allowed her to regain a clear mind. Jean Wan briefly told him about the call she received from Secretary Zhou and what happened after she came here today. Mo Jingshan looked at her and said flatly, someone can bribe Secretary Zhou and trick you into coming here in the name of your father. Ji Mengran, Secretary Zhou, Shinharu, or someone else. I'll find out who it is. Who do you think it is? The sound outside had gone far away. Jean Wan couldn't hear how Mo Jingshan's men were going to deal with this club, but she didn't think they would let it go so easily. Mo Jingshan touched her cold forehead again to prevent her from harming her body. He took the towel and ice pack from her hands and threw them on the coffee table. The Ji family is only so big. If it's not the old, then it's the young. Who else could it be? Stay here. When you feel better, wait for me. I'm going to solve the problem of this club. With that, he asked her to sit down on the sofa, took off his suit jacket and put it on her. He patted her shoulder reassuringly and then closed the door and went out. The men in black suits were Mo Jingshan's men. They had called up the list of all the private rooms booked here from the person in charge of the club. When they saw Mo Jingshan coming out, they handed the list to him. Not long after, the young girl hiding in a private room not far away was taken out. When she was dragged out, she was still cursing and struggling. When she turned to see the man who was unbuttoning his shirt and pacing towards her, her expression froze. Perhaps because she never wanted to do too much in front of Mo Jingshan, Ji Mengran didn't expect that Mo Jingshan would come in such a short time. The man's cold eyes fell on her face. He clearly didn't look surprised at Ji Mengran who had just been caught. As soon as her eyes met Mo Jingshan's, Ji Mengran froze. Pressed by the men in black suits in the corridor, it took her more than 10 seconds to come to herself. Brother Jingshan? Ji Mengran's face turned pale. Why are you here? You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.